I think we're live, but I'll wait for some comments to tell me all the audio quality sounds good. I just thought we would do a stream today where we do an introduction of what we're all about, why we made this channel, why we started this crusade against the Catholics and Orthodox, why we're not with the Orthodox, and what it would take to convince us to be with them, and a few other things. We're opening up the mics. If anybody wants to come up and talk to us and do their best to convince us, you're welcome to. We're going to do our best to convince you that the Catholics and Orthodox are true heretics. On so many points, it's overwhelming. If anybody does their due diligence and just starts reading the early church fathers, they're going to find a lot of contradictions between the early church and the later church really quickly. Very good, Courier. Well, I think it's important that we have a stream where we just go over all the biggest reasons we're not with the Catholics and Orthodox. I can share screens with you here. On the website we made, we go over the biggest reasons. There are some pretty big ones. Look, you got Orthodox, Catholics. As you can see, they share a lot of heresies across the board. A lot of it's just the same stuff with only variations. I think this was prophesied in the Old Testament when you have these two harlot sisters that God keeps speaking to, which was at that time it was Judah and Samaria, but now it's these two groups. It's prophesied. It's in the Old Testament when the Israelites come into the promised land and they immediately go to worshiping this god called Ishtar or Ashtaroth. It's the same female deity. It's the queen of heaven, but she goes by a different name between these two sects. It's really the Catholics and Orthodox. They are worshiping Mary, but there's just two different versions of their worship, but they're sisters. They have so much in common. There are only slight differences, just enough to delude people into thinking they've chosen the better option. So let's go over some of these. We're doing this for your sake, guys. So listen carefully. These are the biggest heresies. If you're going to accuse a group of being in heresy, especially groups that claim apostolic succession and have some true claim to it, they can prove that their lineage goes back a long way. We'd better have some pretty good reasons for not joining them. And we better not start with something stupid, something like the filioque or something absurd like that. Let me start over, though. Let me talk about the correct method to find out which church is the true church, because we're always being accused by people of not being in the true church. We're being called schismatics and heretics. We just want to ask you guys, Catholics and Orthodox, has your priest ever told you what the method is to find the true church? Or when you came over and said, I want to be a catechumen, did he just say, oh, great, that's great? Did he not even ask, well, why did you decide to go with us and not the Catholics? Or why did you decide to go with us and not the Orthodox? Or why this particular Orthodox branch, whether it's one of the Oriental branches or the mainstream Eastern or the Assyrian Orthodox Church of the East, or are they just happy that you rolled that dice and chose a random group to be with? We're not supposed to be doing that. The early church tells us how to know for sure we've chosen the right church. We've chosen the original. They say go back to the original doctrines. Go investigate what the church taught from the beginning. So we did that. We've been doing that for many years, me and my friends. We'd love to be in an institutional church. We're dying to be. It's a false accusation they keep throwing at people like us, and there are other people in the world who've realized this about the Catholics and Orthodox, that they're not the original church. But it's a false accusation when they say, you just want to have your own sect, you want to have your own group. No, we would love to submit to a righteous bishop who humbly submits to the original church and doesn't condemn himself by condemning all the people that came before him. We'll go over these. We'll go over the Orthodox because it seems like the Orthodox are exploding more than the Catholics right now. The first and worst heresy that the Catholics and Orthodox are guilty of right now is commanding people to worship images. They're guilty of other sins like allowing people to go to war and allowing people to get divorced and remarried, have up to 3 marriages, but they strictly forbid a 4th. But not everybody in the Catholic or Orthodox Church is going to war. Not all of them are murderers. Not all of them are getting divorced and remarried. A lot of them are. They say the divorce rate is really high. It's like 50%. So you'd say half of all the people in the Catholic and Orthodox Church are adulterers, but not 100% of them. But 100% of Catholics and Orthodox are idolaters. And so we have to put that at the very top of the list. When you see why God abandons Israel multiple times and allows their enemies to destroy them, and why God calls Israel an adulteress repeatedly, it is on the charge of idolatry. It's the worst possible sin. I'm amazed at people that they are so quick to defend it instead of being terrified out of their minds of committing this heinous sin, which, according to the apostolic constitutions, it says there's no sin worse than idolatry. So we ought to be absolutely terrified of being an idolater. Remember, John says, flee idolatry, flee images or flee idols. You ought to be fleeing these things. That means get as far away from it as you can. You should read what the church fathers say about fornication, because they use the same terminology. The apostles say you ought to flee fornication. It doesn't just mean like go up and fight it, or learn how to fight fornication and lust as well as you can. They say flee from it, get as far away from it as possible, because you don't want to fall into something that is so enticing. It's overpowering. Idolatry is the most common heresy known to mankind. You ever thought about this? How for thousands of years, every single nation on the planet worshipped idols. We have to be fleeing from it. We'll show it though. We'll show the church fathers warned Christians to stay far away from it. That's why you hear so many of those early church fathers just saying no images at all. Just stay completely away from images. But they are obviously warning us to stay away from the substance of idolatry, which is to serve images. That's what idolatry means. Idolatria. Latria means serving, and an idol means an image or a form. So it means serving an image, being a servant to it, being a slave to images. Is it not incredible that the Catholics and Orthodox call themselves image slaves, iconodules? They actually chose that name. Actually, during the iconoclast crisis, they were actually being called iconodules as a kind of insulting name. They were being called iconodules, you image slaves. And they didn't actually embrace that. But now they fully embrace that moniker. They say, yeah, we are image slaves. We're not ashamed to call ourselves slaves of images. If anybody wants to come up and talk about that, we'd love to tell you why it's a sin to be a slave to images. The second biggest heresy, I mean, think about it, guys. They're worshiping the images of emperors. They're not just worshiping the images of saints or Jesus or Mary. I mean, that's bad enough. That is idolatry. God doesn't want to be worshiped that way. He says very explicitly that he deliberately did not show Israel a form. He didn't show them a form when he was up on the mountain speaking to Moses, lest they create images. That's what he said. He doesn't want to be worshiped through lifeless images. He made it clear. But guys, they're not just worshiping God with images. They're worshiping wicked people, emperors. They say, well, Constantine's a Christian. Really, what kind of Christian is he? A persecutor of the church? An Arian? It's a really interesting kind of Christian you've got there. They say, well, he was a Christian. He was a great guy. Really, when did he become a Christian? At the end of his life, maybe on his deathbed. Oh, I see. He got baptized on his deathbed. And then what happened? Did he renounce being an Arian? Did he apologize? Did he confess that he was a persecutor of the church, of Athanasius and Eustathius of Antioch and all the other bishops that he exiled in favor of the Arian position? Did he renounce all that and confess it? No, he never rescinded his exile of these bishops. So what kind of a Christian is Constantine? He's a great Christian you have there. On the one hand, the Cathodox will just they'll just pour out praise and all this love for Athanasius. They'll say Athanasius was against the whole world. He's such an admirable man. We have to love him and respect him because he went against the entire world. And then you say, well, whoa, who was persecuting Athanasius? Who was doing this? You say, well, it was the emperors. Which emperors? Well, Constantine and his son. I see. So Constantine persecuted the church. And so you say Athanasius should be respected for that. He went against the whole world, against all these bishops who were forced into Arianism. There are spineless cowards, but they were all coerced by Constantine and his son. So we'd say Athanasius against the world. And then we say, and over here we got the world, Constantine. And we're going to also call him a saint. And you know what they call Constantine, guys? They call him equal to the apostles. How utterly insane. How utterly blasphemous. A person who drives Christian bishops into exile, persecutes them, replaces them with fake bishops. We're going to call him an equal to the apostles. Calling him a Christian is bad enough. Equal to the apostles. You wouldn't call anybody equal to the apostles. There's nobody equal to the apostles. The only person who's as good as an apostle is Jesus Christ. But you're going to call a wicked emperor, an equal to the apostle. How would you even, at what point did he become equal, by the way? Was it on his deathbed? Because he wasn't a Christian before he was baptized. I don't know. It's just too absurd. These are two big ones, guys. Not just worshiping images of Jesus and the saints, worshiping images of people who persecuted the church. And they want us to have icons of Athanasius on this side and Constantine on this side. And we're going to say, we're going to worship Athanasius against the world, and then we're going to worship world over here. Yeah, that's who we are, us Cathodox. Another massive one, guys, is that in the early church for 300 years, the primary act that the Romans were trying to get Christians to do, to deny the faith, to deny Christ, was to bow down to images of the emperors and offer them incense. Now, you can go see what the Catholics and Orthodox say about this. They'll say, we're just doing it out of respect, like they can change the meaning of incense. Incense is a sacrifice. Incense symbolizes prayers. Of course, they believe in praying to the saints too. So, I mean, it's all an absolute mess. But they say we're offering incense to the image of the emperor. And they say, but we're doing it differently because he's a Christian. It's a Christian emperor, so we're allowed to offer him incense. And then when we point out, wait a second, when was he a Christian? At what point did he become a Christian? Wasn't he an unbaptized heretic? An unbaptized Arian? And you're going to tell me you're offering incense. You're actually doing that in the church. Guys, me and my brother Aramis went to an Orthodox church not too long ago. We spoke to the priest. We bring up icon veneration, and he immediately, it was like providential, he immediately points to an icon of Constantine, of all the icons he could have pointed to. He said, listen, when I offer incense to Constantine up there, I'm not offering it to the image, I'm offering it to him. So he just nonchalantly talks about offering incense to Constantine. So we're back to it. We're back to doing the very thing that constituted a denial of the Christian faith, offering incense to an emperor. And people say, well, he's at least better than the other emperors. Really? How so? Weren't the early emperors persecutors of the church? And was Constantine a persecutor of the church? And they say, yeah, he was a bit of a persecutor of the church. That is true. Yeah, a massive persecutor. And they like to push forward. They push that stupid fake document, the Acts of Sylvester, a complete forgery made sometime in the 400s or 500s, they say. And by the way, it just developed and developed. We don't even know what the original version is. That's why you can't find a critical edition online, because there are so many versions of it. Nobody has any idea where it originally came from or what it looked like. It's changed so much over the centuries. But guys, even in this fake book where they say Constantine wasn't baptized on his deathbed, it was earlier than that, which is total fake history. You realize in this book, it explicitly calls him a persecutor of the church. So at what point did Constantine become this righteous Christian emperor you guys keep calling him? And somebody might say, well, at least he wasn't a pagan emperor. You guys realize being a heretic is worse than being a pagan? According to the church fathers, being a heretic is worse than paganism. And being one who enforces heretical doctrines on the church is worse than a persecutor who just kills your body. Somebody's killing your soul like that. Yeah, good question, Gold Robo. I'll answer that question. Is there a distinction between veneration and worship? Guys, the truth is always so simple. It's not complicated. God said, you shall not make an image, he says a carved image, nor any likeness. So if anybody says, well, he only said a carved image. No, he says, don't make a carved image, nor any likeness. And then he names everything, not just images of Zeus or false gods. He says, don't even make an image of anything in heaven above or in earth beneath or under the earth in the water. Don't make any images to bow down to it or to serve it. So he says two things you're forbidden from doing. And like the church fathers say, God cut them off from even the occasion of idolatry by saying, you're not allowed to make any images. Don't listen to the Cathodox who say, oh, they were allowed to make images because God gave express permission to Moses and Bezalel to make some images. Well, you think that proves everybody can make images just because God gave express permission to Moses and Bezalel to do it, or express permission to Solomon to do it? That is not a free-for-all for everybody to make images. Sure, let's show it right now. Robo, I'll show you where he says it. Not everybody gets to make images. Let's show you what God actually says. He says, you shall not make for yourselves an idol. Here, I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see what we're doing here. Everybody read that. You shall not make for yourselves an idol, nor any likeness of anything, either in heaven above or in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them. That's proskuneo, nor serve them. That's latreo. That means giving gifts or doing service to something. And we know how pagans used to do service to their images. They would offer them incense. That's the first one. They would light candles for them. They would crown them. And of course, they would bow down to them and pray to them. That is all latreo, all five of those things. Six of those things: bowing, kissing, praying to them, offering incense, offering them food, offering them candles, and crowning them. And guess what? The Catholics do every single one of those things. They remove all doubt. If you're ever wondering, I'm not sure if these people are, idolaters. I can't tell. Look at all the things that idolaters do to their images. They do all of them, short of offering food. It's the one thing they don't do, although they do that in Greece. I just found out. They actually do animal sacrifices to their icons in Greece, the Greek Orthodox Church. It's crazy. But all those things already constitute idolatry. You're serving images. This is a massive heresy. I mean, how can it's impossible to put into words just how many heresies they've layered into this. We couldn't do it in a short live stream. I'll be here for a few hours if anybody wants to come up. Everybody's invited. Drop the link. Somebody drop the link. I'll drop it right now. Everybody's invited to come up and talk to me about it. But guys, idolatry is not a complicated thing. It's bowing and it's serving. It's two things: bowing and serving. You shall not bow to them. You shall not serve them. And all these excuses they make. Well, God let Moses do it, or he let Bezalel do it. It doesn't change anything. God did not say, you can make any image you want. Anyone can make it. You can make any kind of image you want, and you can bow to it, and you can serve it. That is what the Catholics are doing. They took specific express commandments to specific people to make specific images for specific purposes, which nobody got to do again. And they say, that's my permission for me and everybody to make any image we want and even worship them, when God never said you could worship the bronze serpent. And on the contrary, God said, as soon as it does get worshiped, whenever people are offering it incense, which by the way is worship Catholics, it has to be destroyed. You realize every single icon that the Catholics have ever made must be destroyed because people worship them. In God's eyes, they're all unclean. They all have to be destroyed. They could have served some purpose for children, or like they say, for people who can't read. They could have served some purpose, but because they've become objects of worship, they have to be destroyed according to God's law. Gold Robo, why don't you come up and explain what you mean? That was, what do you say here? That was the break of the old covenant so that we can fulfill our worship with all our skills now. Really? Why don't you have musical instruments in your church then? They're not allowed. It's such a contradiction. You can ask them, why don't you guys have musical instruments in your church? And they'll say, because God does not want to be worshipped with man-made things. He wants to be worshipped with you, with this organic person he made. He doesn't want you to worship him with these external things. And you say, why in the world do you have images? Oh, well, because God wants to be worshipped with external things and types and the realities. We don't need those. So we'll go back to this. We'll go back to these massive heresies, the biggest heresies possible. They are committing them right now. Let's make a full screen. So idolatry, that would be bowing down to images and serving them. God does not receive that worship. Demons receive that worship. And then worshiping not only images of Jesus and the saints, but even worshiping images of emperors, worshiping images of murderers, even like Theodosia. Theodosia is one of their favorite martyr. They have martyrs. We have martyrs. They have murderers. That's the distinction between us and Catholics. We actually do give great honor to the martyrs. They've got murderers, though, like Constantine. Constantine was a murderer, killed his own son, who turned out to be innocent after he impulsively killed him. Thank you, Raheem, for dropping the link. You guys are welcome to come up here. Let's go over something. I'll be gentle with you. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at the Catholics. I want to help you guys, though. I have the compassion for you that they ought to have for us. Because if we were deceived, if we were just totally off the rails, deluded into rejecting the original church, they ought to really want to help us. And they ought to be excited that we're reading so much of the church fathers, because if we're honestly doing it, then of course we're going to join their church if their church is the true church, right? If their church is the true one and we're submitting to the early church and these two agree with each other, we're definitely going to join Orthodox or Catholics, right? Well, Gold Robo, if you want to call later, you can. Yeah, but we wish they had more compassion. We wish they would say, wow, you're doing the right thing. You're following the philosophy. You're going back to the original church. But see, guys, they don't have any compassion. They hate it that people are reading the early church fathers. There's a movement of people doing it. We're not the only group doing it. You're going to find more groups doing it, more groups saying, wow, the more I read from the early church, the more contradiction I see. I don't see the Catholics and Orthodox. A third massive heresy is Mary's sinlessness. So easy to disprove. The church fathers unanimously, for the first 400 years of church history, unanimously teach against it. All of them. John Chrysostom, Basil, Gregory, Cyril of Alexandria, Jerome, Epiphanius, Athanasius. I mean, every name you can think of, they all say that Mary committed sins. They name 4 sins explicitly. Jerome names way more than 4. Mind-blowing. He thinks the scriptures are explicit. They all quote scripture and say, look, the scriptures actually explicitly say Mary committed sins, even prophesied that she would commit sins, and that Jesus is the only sinless one. It's amazing. And, we talk to Catholics and Orthodox. It's always split between Catholics and Orthodox. We'll talk to Orthodox and they'll say, well, our church doesn't teach that as a dogma, that Mary never committed sins. We don't teach that as a dogma. So it's no problem. You say, wow, that doesn't save your church. Orthodox, listen, do you understand that by saying, well, half of our church believes that or practices that wrong thing, but hey, at least our church has never dogmatically or enforced that false doctrine. You realize how ridiculous that sounds? So what are they waiting on? You're just conceding that this is a heresy that half of your church is teaching, but nobody's going to condemn it? We're just going to tolerate it. By the way, how long is it going to take for them to dogmatically enforce the truth and say, quit saying Mary is sinless? When are they going to take it out of their liturgies? When are we going to stop seeing apologetic videos, Orthodox versus Protestants? How long is that going to take? But I just hate that response. It's like, and you always get half of them. Some of them are just adamant, no, Mary never committed sins. And then the other half, they're like, it's not dogmatic in our church. You can believe what I want, whatever you want. Just like with evolution. They say, it doesn't matter what you believe. We don't enforce that. So half of the Orthodox priests can teach evolution. All the Catholics can do it. It's okay. It doesn't matter. And there'd be a lot more evolutionists if it weren't for Jay Dyer. It's one of the only things that he is courageous about. I'll give that to him, that Jay actually fights against evolution and exposes it. That's great. Problem is, you're telling people to worship images, to do the only 2 things God forbade you from doing to images, bowing to them and offering them service, which is incense, a sacrifice. Another heresy is this Coloridian heresy. Well, still on the subject of Mary, there was a heresy in the early 400s. You get to see how this developed with this worship of Mary. But there was a little group that Epiphanius talks about in his Panarion, his medicine chest, where he names 80 heresies in all of church history. He starts with the Pharisees and Sadducees and the Samaritans, and he goes through it. He goes all the way to the end, and by the time he's getting to the 80th heresy, I think this one is like 79. It's one that had just appeared recently in his day, and it was a group of the Coloridians, the people who offer the bread loaves in Mary's name. He said, these crazy people take a loaf and they offer it in Mary's name. He goes, it's just silly. It's just completely absurd. And by the way, he doesn't say they offer it to Mary. He says they offer it in Mary's name. Now, some people might say that's the same thing, but I just want you to know that is a distinction. He at least is very specific in his terminology. But what the Catholics, what the Orthodox do? Every single time they have the Eucharist, they chop out a part of the Eucharist bread and they offer it in Mary's name. They dedicate it to Mary. It's incredible. And nobody even talks about this. This was a heresy starting to appear in the 400s, and it caught on, and now it's mainstream in the Orthodox Church. Crazy. He says a lot of other things too. He condemns this group for calling Mary the Queen of Heaven. He says, we've never called Mary Queen of Heaven. I want you to do it, guys. Go on Catholic Library. CatholicLibrary.com, isn't that what it is? CatholicLibrary.org. That's what it is. Go in there. It has the most exhaustive list of all the Church Fathers' writings. It's got the greatest search tool of any website we've ever seen. Do a word search. Look up this phrase, Queen of Heaven. See when in church history they started calling Mary Queen of Heaven. I'll give you some hints. It's not the 100s. It's not the 200s. It's not the 300s. It's not the 400s. Not in the church, not mainstream. The first time you'll find a church father calling her Queen of Heaven, it's not the 500s either. And it's not the 600s. I'll leave it to you. Why don't you go do it? Go see the earliest reference you can find of them calling Mary Queen of Heaven. It took a long time for that to take off. Another prophecy in the Old Testament. Okay, these are 4 massive heresies here. These are pretty big. According to the Catholics and Orthodox, I should have left them a long time ago if these are true. And we'd love for some people to come up and we can debate them. And we have a lot of videos to make about this. But if this is true, you should be running for your life from these people. They say you should leave a church and recognize it to be an apostate church if they just teach a teeny tiny little error about Jesus' essence or his generation, or whether he has a human soul or a divine soul, or whether he has one nature, two natures combined into one, or two distinct natures and one person. They have all these little distinctions. They say, if you get it wrong on this tiny little thing, you are excommunicated. You are not a Christian. See, this hypocrisy is to our benefit because they are following the footsteps of their true fathers, the Jews, the Pharisees, who strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. It just means that they will fight tooth and nail over tiny little things that do not matter. But when it comes to massive things like, oh, maybe we should flee idolatry, even according to their own definition, they'd say, we get as close to idolatry as we possibly can. We are just like snuggle up to her, like, yeah, we love you, idolatry, but we're not going to actually become idolatrous. We're just going to get as close as possible. And the Orthodox will even say to the Catholics, you Catholics, oh, you guys are really idolatrous. You guys take it way too far with the Mary statues and all that. We wouldn't go that far. So yeah, actually, look at the Catholics. That's idolatry, but not us. Oh, we're real careful that even though we get as close as possible as we can to idolatry, we don't actually become idolatrous. I wonder, you Catholics, what would it take for you to become idolatrous? What even is idolatry to you? They never define it either. They never define it. It's always games. You ask them, are you guys idolaters? Well, listen, in the Old Testament, they made images. Oh, wait a second. Can you define idolatry for me? Well, listen, in the Old Testament, they had the Ark of the Covenant and there were images. Wait a second. Now, God said, don't make any images and don't bow down to them or serve them. Well, God let them make these others. Oh, wait a second. What is God talking about? Just answer the question. Can you do this, Catholics? Can you tell me what idolatry is? Can you tell me what God was forbidding? Don't just tell me what he seems to have allowed to very specific people at specific times, allowing them to make very specific images for specific purposes, which never entailed bowing down to them or offering them incense or other sacrifices. Can you just tell me what idolatry is? We can. Guys, we can define it because we've learned it from the church. The church told us what idolatry is. It's when you bow down to images and offer them sacrifices of incense. That's idolatry. Okay, we'll keep going down the list. We've got murder. The early church categorically forbade anybody to go to war. Why don't we read a few as we go, by the way? Let's just read a few. Let's read a few church fathers talking about this. Let's look up Hippolytus. They always say, you only have one or two quotations. Okay, maybe I'll do like 10 or 20. Here's Hippolytus. He says, when he's talking about people who are coming to become catechumens, this is one of the rules, one of the requirements that the entire church had. They will inquire concerning the works and occupations of those who are brought forward for instruction to become catechumens. A military man in authority must not execute men. If he is ordered, he must not carry it out, nor must he take military oath. If he refuses, he shall be rejected. If someone is a military governor or the ruler of a city who wears the purple, he shall cease or he shall be rejected. The catechumen or faithful who wants to become a soldier is to be rejected, for he has despised God. And they'll always lie and they'll say, well, this is only talking about the idol sacrifices. You would have to do idol sacrifices if you were a military man back then. Wait a second. Is that what it mentions? Does it mention anything about idol sacrifices? Or does it say a military man must not execute men? He can't kill people. The emphasis is on killing. It is not on the idol sacrifices. That is a completely separate thing that the Tertullian talks about in great detail. And even says, now what if a person were able to be in the military without doing idol sacrifices? Would he still be excommunicated for being in the military if he continues to stay in it when he has the opportunity to leave? And he says, yeah, absolutely. He'll be excommunicated just because in the military, you're not allowed to make oaths. That was already unlawful that you made an oath in the first place. You need to leave that. You need to leave your second master as quickly as possible so you can serve Christ, your true master. And also, you are going to be compelled to kill people. That's why you need to get out of the military. It is killing that's the problem. Why don't we read Marcus Aurelius? This is one that we haven't talked about much. We haven't put it on, on the channel very much. But look, this is an authentic letter which Justin Martyr delivers to us, written by the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, where he talks about an encounter he had with some Christians in his army. He says, I was surrounded by the enemy, And the enemy being at hand, there was close on us a mass of a mixed multitude of 977,000 men, which indeed we saw. Having then examined my own position and my host with respect to the enemy, I quickly betook myself to prayer to the gods of my country. But being disregarded by them, I summoned those who among us go by the name of Christians. And having made inquiry, I discovered a great number and vast host of them, and raged against them, which was by no means becoming. For afterwards I learned their power. Wherefore they began the battle, not by preparing weapons, nor arms, nor bugles, for such preparation is hateful to them, on account of the God they bear about in their conscience. Therefore, it is probable that those whom we suppose to be atheists have God as their ruling power entrenched in their conscience. For having cast themselves on the ground, they prayed not only for me, but also for the whole army as it stood, that they might be delivered from the present thirst and famine. For during 5 days we had got no water, because there was none. But for we were in the heart of Germany, and in the enemy's territory, and simultaneously with their casting themselves on the ground and praying to God, a God of whom I am ignorant, water poured from heaven upon us, most refreshingly cool, but upon the enemies of Rome, a withering hail. So he says the enemies got destroyed by God's power, but God did not allow his people to bear the sword. They're not allowed to use weapons because those things are hateful to them on account of the God they bear about in their conscience. Where's the emphasis on the pagan idol worship? It's not there, guys. That's not the reason why they couldn't be in the military. It was because as Christians, we have a brand new mandate, which nobody in the Old Testament was required to do except the priests. But because we are a nation of priests, none of us are allowed to kill people. It's completely forbidden to us. It's a new higher standard, a new higher calling. God wishes for us to win over the enemy to the faith, just like Christians did for the first 300 years. We're not allowed to kill people. And over again, the church fathers say, I mean, if you just scroll through this, I mean, guys, go read the website. Hundreds of quotations from the church fathers, even through the 300s. You guys realize the Council of Nicaea completely forbade anybody who had rightfully left the military to return to the military. If you return to the military, you would be excommunicated. You're required to leave it as soon as you got the opportunity. And even while you're in it, you have to take a new oath to never kill anybody. Listen to it. This is the Council of Nicaea. As many as were called by grace and displayed the first zeal, having cast aside their military girdles, but afterwards returned like dogs to their own vomit, so that some even spent money and by means of gifts rejoined their military stations, or they regained their military stations. Let these, after they have passed the space of 3 years as hearers, be for 10 years prostrators, a 13-year excommunication if you return to the military. There are so many of these in these writings. So many, I don't even know what to go to first. Rufinus has a really great one too. He talks about how Julian the Apostate hated that Christians were in his army. There's really great stories about this, about the Christians all refusing to fight because they said we're not allowed to as Christians. But it says he, Julian the Apostate, ordered that posts in the armed or civil service should be given only to those who sacrifice. He decreed that the government of provinces and the administration of justice should not be entrusted to Christians, since their own law forbade them to use the sword. So even the pagans are aware of this. They're talking about this. You guys cannot be in my military. I don't want you in my military. Even your own law doesn't let you be bearing the sword. You're not allowed to kill people. Anyway, just one of the many heresies. They now endorse it in the Catholic and Orthodox churches. They endorse war. They say it's this epic, great thing you're doing. You guys know there's no greater illustration than what we're watching right now with the war in Ukraine, the Russian war, where they've got their big, fat, multi-billion-dollar KGB agent, Patriarch Kirill, blessing the warriors, blessing them who go and kill. Yeah, maybe I'll read the one from Martin. It's a great one. Maybe I will. Absolutely wicked that they are sending people out to kill, and they're blessing them, and they're saying, if you kill, you're blessed. You're saving your country. You're saving your countrymen, and so you're actually expiating your own sins if you're killing your fellow man in this war. And another reason why it's just such a perfect illustration of the insanity of these people is because both sides, both the Orthodox on the Russian side and the Orthodox on the Ukrainian side, they're part of the same church. They have the same faith. So they're being commanded by their government to kill their brothers in the faith. They are going and killing fellow Christians. And they're both being told, you have to do this for your country. Go and defend your country by killing your actual Christian brothers. The wickedness. Absolute wickedness. You're not expiating any sins by doing that. Early church completely forbade this, completely condemned and excommunicated. Even Council of Nicaea will excommunicate you for minimum 13 years. And even when this post-Nicene church started allowing this, Basil is one of the first ones to allow this. I mean, just so utterly absurd. Let me read this to you. This is Basil, who's one of the first ones to start allowing people to go to war. He says, our predecessors did not consider killing in war as murder, but as I understand it, made allowances for those who fought for the side of moderation and piety. By the way, have you ever seen a war fought on the side of moderation? Maybe he doesn't even know the definition of war. What is a moderate war? Absolutely crazy. But here's the big one, guys. You see this part? Or he says, our predecessors, the early church fathers, they didn't consider it killing in war. They didn't consider killing to be murder. As I understand it, oh, Basil. Well, there you go. You said it all. Thank you very much for that little tidbit. By the way, I put a little link here because here I found an Orthodox article. I can't believe the Orthodox are so shameless. An Orthodox priest, Father John McGuckin, he came out and he said, I have to talk about this often quoted excerpt from Basil, where he says, our predecessors. He says, to tell you the truth, at the time there was a single quote, not multiple, a single quotation floating around at the time that people in the post-Nicene church were trying to use to justify going to war. It's one quotation from Athanasius, and it's completely taken out of context. He says, this saying was being circulated and given authority as a patristic witness simply because it had come from Athanasius. In fact, the original letter had nothing whatsoever to do with war. The very example of the war hero is a sardonic reference ad hominem, since the letter was addressed to an aged leader of the Egyptian monks who described themselves as ascetes, that is, those who labored and fought for the virtuous life. The military image is entirely incidental, and Athanasius, in context, merely used it to illustrate his chief point in the letter, which is to discuss the query that had been sent to him. So even the Orthodox are making articles. I could not believe it. I appreciate the honesty of you liars sometimes. They're saying it's not even a real quotation. Basil is completely out to lunch. The whole early church completely forbade this. Even the Council of Nicaea. Has he ever read the canons of Nicaea? I'm just wondering, what planet is Basil on? But here's the best part. After he says, our predecessors did not consider killing in war to be murder. As I understand it, by my authority, I hereby overrule the entire church's teaching on this. He says, but they made allowances for people who fought on the side of moderation and piety. Nevertheless, this is Basil speaking. Nevertheless, it is good to admonish those whose hands are unclean to abstain just from communion for 3 years. So you are excommunicated for 3 years if you kill anybody in war. Okay, wait a second, Basil. If it's a good thing to do, if it's what they call just war, like Augustine says, why in the world are you being excommunicated for it? You're telling me I'm going to be excommunicated for doing something good? Absolutely crazy. And if he says something like, well, as Christians, we just have to be very holy, and that's why you should be excommunicated. Yes, Basil, that's the point. We Christians are supposed to be very holy. We cannot stain our hands with human blood. Yeah, that deserves excommunication. What in the world? What's wrong with him? Has he lost it? Why don't we read one more, and then I'll go to the next heresy of the Orthodox. Here's a really great one. Martin of Tours. You just can't make this stuff up, guys, but Martin of Tours is the patron saint of soldiers in the Orthodox Church. You can't make up this stuff. Let's see if Martin of Tours, the patron saint of soldiers in the Catholic Church, if he approved of killing people. Let's see. Here's the soldier, Martin of Tours. This is written by Sulpicius Severus in the early 400s, and Martin of Tours lived in the about 350s during the reign of Julian the Apostate. It says, Martin was 3 years under arms before his baptism. Yet free from those vices in which such men are commonly involved, his kindness toward his fellow soldiers was great, his charity remarkable, and his patience and humility surpassed human measure. There's no need to praise his temperance. It was such that even then he was considered not a soldier, but a monk. It says, the blessed man was not puffed up with human pride because of this vision. So he says Jesus came to him and called him to become a Christian. Rather, recognizing God's goodness in his own act, he was baptized without delay. He was then 18. So apparently he started as a soldier at 15. Amazing. But, now listen to this part, Orthodox. But he did not immediately renounce military service. What a strange thing to say. It's almost as if you're supposed to renounce military service when you become a Christian. Won over by the prayers of his tribune, whom Martin accompanied in terms of intimate friendship, this officer promised that he would renounce the world upon the completion of the term of his tribunate. Held in suspense by this expectation, Martin, for about 2 years after his baptism, remained a soldier, though only in name. What does that mean, to remain a soldier, but only in name? Let's find out. He did not think it would be honest for him. Okay, so it says, in the meantime, the barbarians were invading the Gallic provinces. Assembling an army in the city of Vanghione, Emperor Julian prepared to distribute a bonus to his troops. The men were called up in the customary manner, one by one, until Martin's turn came. He recognized that moment as a suitable time to ask for his discharge, and he did not think it would be honest for him to accept the bonus when he did not intend to fight. So Emperor Julian the Apostate is going to give them a bonus for fighting in this big battle. And he says, count me out. I'm leaving the army officially here. I don't intend to fight, so I will not take any extra payment. He says, I have fought for you up to this point. Now let me fight for God. As for your bonus, let someone who is going to join the battle receive it. I am a soldier of Christ. Combat is not permitted me. End of story, Cathodox. And of course, he gets very angry. And then Martin says, if my act is set down to cowardice rather than to faith, he said, I shall stand unarmed tomorrow before our lines in the name of the Lord Jesus and protected only by the sign of the cross, without shield or helmet. I shall penetrate the enemy's ranks and not be afraid. Well, right on. He is speaking like a true Christian right now. He says, the order was given that he should be put under guard. He was to make good his promise to be exposed unarmed to the barbarians. The next day, the enemy sent an embassy to sue for peace. It was a miracle, handing over themselves and all that was theirs. From this, can anyone doubt that the victory was due to the blessed man, a grace granted to prevent his being sent unarmed into combat? True, the Lord in his goodness could have preserved his soldier even among swords and spears, yet to prevent the gaze of the saint from being outraged even by the death of others, he removed the need of the battle. Christians don't like to look on the deaths of others. We're not supposed to. We Christians don't take any pleasure in that. We wouldn't watch movies of people getting slaughtered. I used to do that when I was more messed up by this evil culture. You've got to stop that, guys. It's destroying your minds to see that, to be so desensitized. You're always watching movies about people getting shot or chopped up, blood everywhere, guts everywhere. You're getting desensitized. You need to get sensitive again. You need to be restored to the childlike state of having an aversion to all those things. And this is what Sulpicius Sever says. He says, this was exactly the kind of victory Christ ought to have granted for his soldiers' sake, a capitulation of the enemy in which no one died and no blood was shed. So it's very clear. Combat is not permitted to a soldier of Christ. We have so many quotations in this whole section, hundreds of them. And of course, if we give the ones like Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria and Origen so explicit, they're going to be like, we reject them. Okay, well, let me quote all the others then. They always think that we only have Tertullian and Clement of Alexandria and Origen. So pathetic. They all say the same thing. We'll go to the next one. Let's go to the next heresy of the Cathodox. They allow people to go to war, which is murder. And even in their own church to this day, the Orthodox will still excommunicate you if you kill someone, even in self-defense. Is that not utter hypocrisy? There's much to say about that insanity of telling people that sometimes you have to kill. And then on the other hand saying, but you will be excommunicated. What? So I have to do something that results in loss of salvation, severance from the church, loss of grace, cut off from the body of Christ? I have to do something that results in loss of my salvation? What are you talking about? First you say, listen, you're not in our church because you don't have the sacraments. You need to have the sacraments. And I'm saying, yeah, I want to have the sacraments. I do. And then they say, but sometimes you do have to kill people and you have to be cut off from the sacraments. What? Are you okay? Have you lost it, Cathodox? Are you okay? Adultery. Baptist, give me a break, Mark. You can't be serious. You think a Baptist obeys the early church? We're trying to obey the early church better than the Catholics and Orthodox. You wish we were Baptists, because then you wouldn't have to be afraid of us condemning your church. You could just write us off and say, oh, they're hypocrites. They don't really take any of this seriously. No, we're not Baptists, Mark. Why don't you come up here and talk to me? You just came on? You want to come in again? I didn't see you. I'll ask you some questions. I'll ask you how I see Church of Christ. We've spoken to you before. Are you asking if we're Baptist? Do we seem Baptist? Baptists are against war. Baptists love war. Church of Christ loves war. But you know, the founder of your sect, Alexander Campbell, he didn't like war. He had the early churches teaching on war. He forbade it. He said it's murder. He made a great sermon. It's called An Address on War. You should go listen to it. My brother Aramis made an excellent audiobook of it. Somebody dropped a link for Mark to watch that. Seriously, it's like an hour. You should watch it. It'll change your life. Christians don't go to war. We're not allowed to. Adultery. This is another one allowed in Church of Christ in all denominations today. They allow people to divorce and remarry. The Orthodox Church allows this. Our brother Nolan just made a 4-hour and 20-minute long video explaining and just exhaustively showing every single church father's teaching on this in all the early centuries of church history. It is a categorical condemnation of divorce and remarriage as adultery. And yet they practice it. They practice one of the worst sins. Remember, guys, half of all marriages end in divorce. And by the way, the percentage of those who remarry, it's comically higher than the percentage of people that divorce. You realize the percentage of people that divorce is like 50%. But part of the reason why it is so insanely high is because people, like every single person who gets divorced also divorces the second person they marry. And they get another marriage. They just keep doing it 2 or 3 times, sometimes 4 times. So they're committing multiple adulteries. They're with so many different people under this disguise of marriage. It's not marriage. It's just repeated adulteries. They allow that. See, what is the use of having a priest if he's going to allow you to do all these evil things? If it can be proved that they really are idolaters, you know, what is the use, guys? Why would you go to a church? You're going to say, but I think I need one. I need a priest. Okay, guys, the Jews also needed a priest in the Old Testament. Don't you know God gave the Levitical priesthood for his people to be saved? He says the priest's lips guard knowledge. You know, you'll find wisdom from him. You'll find the correct interpretation of Scripture from the priests. The priests are the ones who perform the sacrifices. You know, in the Old Testament, God said, if anybody doesn't have the Passover sacrifice, which is the precursor and the symbol of Christ's body and blood, the Eucharist, he says, if anybody doesn't have it, they are cut off from Israel. And God says, God will spurn them too. God rejects them if they are not having the regular sacrifice. So, question, during those years that the Jews were apostate and their priests were worshiping Baal and other idols, how in the world were people supposed to be saved? Were they damned just because they separated from their evil priests? What a ridiculous thing to suggest. Was Athanasius and were all the Christians during the Arian crisis, which lasted over 40 years, were they all damned because they were leaving their heretical churches, fleeing from their evil priests in obedience to the commands that you find in apostolic constitutions and in Athanasius' own writings, where he says, you must leave these people, get away from these heretics? Are you damned for doing that? How ridiculous. You're more beloved by God. You stand out more as a true believer when you separate from these people. You're not going to be saved by it. Don't let them trick you. They want your money, which goes to the next one, simony. They actually dare charge people money to be baptized. Now, baptismal regeneration is true. You do have to be baptized. The real presence of Christ in the Eucharist is true. It's what the church taught from the beginning. So how much more wicked are these people? Just as the Protestants point out. They're right to point this out. How much more wicked are they to say, you need this for salvation, and you better pay me money so that you can get salvation. I will profit off of you. I will get money from you. And that's going to be the price you pay. Protestants have a heresy. They call it paid in full. They say, I don't have to do anything. Jesus does it all for me. It's paid in full. All the price for my sins, paid in full. I don't have to do anything. I'm free to sin as much as I want. Catholics have their own version of that. They're paid in full as I paid my priest some money. So I'm saved. Look at this. $400. Annunciation, Greek Orthodox Church. See, we gave links. See, you can actually go and read it. You can see we're not making this up. Look, this is a real church, Orthodox Church. Annunciation, Greek Orthodox Church. What do they say? Fees for the baptism. Please note, the person sponsoring the baptism must be a member of an Orthodox parish in good standing. A member in good standing is a person who regularly attends church services and financially supports his or her local parish. I see. Special emphasis on that financially supports part, right? If you are not a member in good standing at our parish, there is a facilities fee of $750. If you are a member in good standing of another Orthodox parish, there is a facility fee of $600. 20% discount. What are we, at a supermarket? You're having discount signs at your Orthodox church? Hey, come in on this day, 20% discount on the sacraments of salvation. If you are a member in good standing in our parish, there's a facility fee of $400. Now, we always ask these people, I called Josiah Trenham's church. I'm asking them, guys, what in the world do you need $700 for? This isn't his church, but, they all do it. Why do you need hundreds and hundreds of dollars? And they say, well, listen, somebody's got to clean up the water that drips on the floor. They actually said that. Are you kidding me? You can't get somebody to just do that? You're telling me there's not one person in your church who just is servant-hearted enough that they just say, I want to help the church. I'll clean up the water that spills. It's incredible. I went to an Orthodox church recently. I go in there. I'm supposed to meet the priest. This is a different priest than the one I was talking about earlier. We go to talk to him, and it's not time to meet him yet, so I'm waiting a few minutes. I go to use the restroom. I go there, and there is a woman. She is employed. She's with some official cleaning service. She's being employed by the priest to clean the bathrooms. I'm sitting there going, how is this possible? How is it that you don't have somebody in your church to do this? You're really going to have me donate money to your church, and you're going to outsource bathroom cleaning to people outside of the church. You're going to bring people into the holy temple. I'm going to bring these unbelievers into our temple, and they're going to do the work of cleaning. I mean, what does that say about your church? You don't have one volunteer who's willing to clean the bathroom. By the way, how absurd to have a bathroom in a holy temple. You ever thought about how crazy that is? It's the holy temple dedicated to Jesus where we poop and pee. You got to have a bathroom in a temple. It's all about the smell in our church. It's all about, you want to experience God through the senses. And in our temple, we've got the incense on this side, and then, make sure you close the door quickly. Don't let the bathroom smell come into the main area. I mean, how absurd. In your temple, you're pooping and peeing. You don't even know what a temple is. Seriously, guys, you're all about the carnal, and you can't even get the carnal part right. They didn't have bathrooms in the temple in the Old Testament, just so you know. Just so you know. Okay. Yeah, but we've got a lot of these. It's not just $600. It's not just $750. It's not just $1,000, Crazy. Absolutely crazy. Let's look at this one. Let's look at the $1,000 one. $1,000 to be baptized. Unbelievable. These people they haven't lost their minds. They never had their minds. Okay, now I really like this one. Prophet Elias Church. Is this not the most fitting name? Prophet Elias? Prophet. They got that right, but they spelled prophet wrong. Baptism. Sacrament fee. Can you believe? Look at this. Store. You click on store. You literally, guys, in order to get to the screen, I had to click on store. And then I go to shop. Baptism. Sacrament fee. If anybody says this is just to clean up afterward. No. They called it sacrament fee. And you scroll down, and what do you click? Add to cart. Your baptism is in your shopping cart. The only thing that's missing here is, give it, 3 business days to process your payment. They actually do have that on another one I can show you. Business days. But we're not a business. Yeah. Baptism fee is $300. In order to be baptized in Prophet Elias Church, the parents and godparents must be members at the time of booking the baptism. Let me translate that for you. You must have your Netflix subscription. You must be paying us every month. Otherwise, we're going to have to charge you a little more. These people are so sick. In the case of an adult baptism, the adult being baptized must be members at the time of booking the baptism. Therefore, other membership fees may be added as required. You must be a member. What is a member? What does that mean? Well, an individual annual membership is $150. An individual life membership is $1,500. Prophet Elias. What would Elijah say if he saw this? How dare you name yourself Prophet Elias? We actually have a story about this in the Bible. I should read it. You guys should read Elijah. I'm surprised we don't have this on this section. We need to add this to this section. Where is it? We got to add this to this section. I thought I had this here. Let's see here. Do I have it here? Yeah, I do. Oh, it's Elisha. It's not Elijah. It's Elisha. That's why I couldn't word search it. Yeah, some of them are charging $1,400. But this was all prophesied in the Old Testament. Here's Jeremiah. From the least to the greatest, all are greedy for gain. Prophets and priests alike, all practice deceit. They dress the wound of my people as though it were not serious. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. Micah says, her leaders judge for a bribe, her priests teach for a price, and her prophets tell fortunes for money. Yet they lean on the Lord and say, is not the Lord with us? No disaster will come upon us. That's the Orthodox. They'll say the worker is worthy of his wages. Why don't you require money for the Eucharist then? Why don't you do that? With that reasoning, you really could require people to pay money to receive the Eucharist. If you say, well, it's for baptism, we got to clean up the water. Okay, well, somebody's got to bake the bread. Why doesn't the baker have to get paid? Ultimately, by the way, guys, it goes to the priest. Did you know half of all your donations go to your priest's outrageous salary? It's the same for the Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants. It used to be, guys, that when you gave money to the church, the bishop would distribute that money to people who were in need. It wouldn't go to himself. In fact, go read the apostolic canons. It says if the bishop appropriates any money from the funds that were donated, he's to be excommunicated. He's to be deposed. He can't take any of that money for himself. Now it's standard practice. Everybody just accepts it. Well, our priest, we're giving money and he's taking half of it for himself. And the other half, most of it goes to that stupid domed ceiling, paying the mortgage on that stupid temple with the poop and the pee in it. The poop and pee temple. The bathroom temple. Bathroom. How utterly absurd. Not even the pagans did that, guys. Not even the pagans put bathrooms in their temples. So ridiculous. But it's all a racket. They all want your money. Imagine if the apostles were going around saying, "I get time to hand me the money," on the baptism of the 5,000 in Acts 2. They're going to say, "All right, come up here. I got my money bag. Everybody who comes over, drop a few shillings in there, drop a little shekel in there. There you go. Ding, 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 ding. All right, keep coming. Ting, ting, ting. We're gonna give it for the poor. We're gonna give it. It's gonna go to somebody who needs it, and also my salary. Ding, 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 ding. Come on, keep coming. Really? You think the apostles were doing that? You think they would be saved if they were doing that? And you guys are shameless. You're fearless, you Catholic and Orthodox priests who charge money for this. It's Catholics and Orthodox. They both charge money for baptisms. Let me read you, though, a story about a voluntary donation, because some people say, well, as long as it's voluntary, it's not a sin. If they were requiring it, that would be bad, but it's just voluntary because, you can ask the priest. And a lot of the time they'll say, all right, you don't have to pay me money. You can just be baptized and you don't have to pay me anything. We speak to people. I say the priests really say that. Well, it's just voluntary. We do ask for it, but it's voluntary. Okay, let's see if voluntary donations for baptism are allowed in Scripture. Let's read it. Was Elisha allowed to take a voluntary donation after Naaman's baptism? The church fathers say the baptism of Naaman, where he's dipped in the Jordan 7 times and comes out, they say that's all symbolic of baptism, even down to the part where it says his skin was restored to a baby's skin. It's talking about how you're made completely innocent in baptism, just like a baby. There goes original sin, by the way. Or would he have been cursed? Would Elisha have gone away with charging him money? Let's read the story. Let's read what it said. And he said, all is well. So let me remind you the story, guys. In the story, Elisha is offered a bunch of money by Naaman, the Assyrian. And he says, I've got all this money for Elisha. Please take it. And Elisha says, no, I cannot take it. Go home. And so he says, all right, I'll take it home. But Gehazi, Elisha's servant, goes, what? You're letting all that money go? He was going to give you a big donation. So Gehazi chases after Naaman. And Naaman says, is everything okay? Is all well? Gehazi said, all is well. My master has sent me to say, there have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing. So he says, give it as donations to the church, to God's leaders, the leaders of Israel. They need some clothes. They need just a little bit of a donation. Now, some people might suggest, well, Gehazi is only going to be condemned, and he's only going to receive the leprosy of Naaman just because he lied. But see, guys, the story is in here to illustrate the Orthodox. It's to tell you that's the excuse they give. Well, we're doing it for the church. It's going to the church fund. It's actually going to themselves, just like it was going to Gehazi. He's not giving it to anybody. He's giving it to himself. Even if he did give it to somebody, he'd still be condemned. Do you understand that? Even if Gehazi gave that money to anybody else, it was still against God's law. You cannot take payment for giving somebody a sacrament, for performing a miracle, because God is the one who performs it. That is a total corruption of your office, of your job. Just wickedness from beginning to end. This is also prophesied in Jesus going into the temple and turning over the tables of the money changers and those who sold doves. That symbolizes those people who sell the Holy Spirit. They sell baptism and the Eucharist for a price. You know what Peter says about that? For anybody who wants to buy it, he says, let your money go to destruction with you. Guys, that's talking about somebody who thinks that they can buy the sacraments. How much worse is it to sell the sacraments, to actually profit off of them? Peter says if you're even just trying to buy them, you're automatically damned for that. So how much worse are these people who sell it? Do you understand this is one of the worst possible sins, to sell the sacraments? And the way how flippant they are, it's just astonishing. When they're like, well, it's just a little donation. I mean, do you realize what you are doing? Do you realize this is one of the worst sins? And you're so flippant about it. Well, I mean, it's just a little donation. You think that's going to fly on Judgment Day? I like to see it. Another one of their massive sins, the oldest heresy in all of Christianity, is Judaizing. And they are Judaizers, the Orthodox. They teach that the only way to worship God properly is by offering incense. How utterly absurd. And they know that the early church didn't practice it. They condemned it. Here's the Dictionary of Greek Orthodoxy. There is no clear evidence of the Christian use of incense until about the year 500. Censers may at first have been fixed, with the introduction of portable censers originating later. The incensing of the altar, church, and congregation is first recorded in the 9th century. That is an Orthodox priest saying that. And by the way, he was scrounging for evidence. You know they were. You know the whole committee that put together this encyclopedia was trying to find every piece of evidence they could to support offering incense. But at the end of the day, they have to admit, just like all these websites here, that the early church did not offer incense. The earliest documented history of using incense during Catholic liturgy comes from the Eastern branch of the church. The rituals of the Divine Liturgy of St. James and St. Mark, dating from the 5th century, include the use of incense. It's as early as they can go. And even those liturgies developed a lot over time. Nobody even knows how early those were. They think maybe sometime in the 400s. Here is a Catholic website. When exactly incense was introduced into the religious services of the church is not easy to say. During the first 4 centuries, there is no evidence for its use. So they know that. And they play games and they say, we've heard this one, get this, guys, this is what they say. They say, well, the reason why the early church didn't offer incense is because it was associated with pagan sacrifices. I mean, I want you to just think about that. Seriously. I want you to think about what came up with. I want you to be logical about it. Okay, now think about it, guys. I know my face is red. I'm worked up. I'm astonished at you, Orthodox. You think that the Christians who are going to their deaths, being slaughtered every day for 300 years, you think they're worried about what the pagans think about their worship practices? You realize Christians, first of all, they're not offering, even if they were doing liturgies without incense, like nobody's even watching them do that. You understand? They wouldn't even be doing that publicly. It's a private ceremony. But anyway, how absurd. So they're already doing things that the pagans absolutely hate. The pagans think they are crazy to have this Eucharist thing, to have no images, to have no temples, to have no altars, to worship a crucified man. How about that one? You think the Christians care what the pagans think? Like, oh, we can't use incense. They might think we're weird. And you Orthodox talk out of 2 sides of your mouth because there's a big contradiction here. Don't you claim that this incense comes from the Old Testament? So couldn't they just say, well, we're doing it just like they did in the Old Testament? Why would they be afraid of somebody thinking that it was associated with paganism? That's so utterly absurd, that explanation you give for why they weren't offering incense in the Old Testament. Crazy. No, they didn't offer incense. Well, actually, did you know you can read the Church Fathers and find out why they didn't offer incense? Did you know you could do that? Did you know you don't have to speculate and make up crazy stories about it being associated with paganism? You could read it anytime you want. Here, let's read some John Chrysostom. Let's do it. Here we go. See what John Chrysostom says is the reason why they don't offer incense. Going to zoom in a little bit. Is that big enough for you? He says, he's commentating on the Gospel of John, but the hour comes and now is when the true worshipers shall worship the Father. He's commentating on Jesus' dialogue with the Samaritan woman. We, O woman, he says, excel you in the manner of our worship, But even this, so even the Jewish worship, shall henceforth have an end. Not the places only, but even the manner of serving God shall be changed. And this change is at your very doors, for the hour comes and now is. For although the Jews be better than the Samaritans, yet are they far inferior to those that shall come, as inferior as is the type to the reality. But he speaks of the church, that she is the true worship, and such as is meet for God. For the Father seeks such to worship him. God is a spirit, but when he says this, he declares nothing else than his incorporeal nature. That means God doesn't have a body, he's not physical. Now, the service of that which is incorporeal must be of the same character and must be offered by that in us which is incorporeal, the soul, and purity of mind. Wherefore he says, they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. For because both Samaritans and Jews were careless about the soul, but took great pains about the body, cleansing it in various ways, it is not, he says, by purity of body, but by that which is incorporeal in us, namely, thus the mind, that the incorporeal one is served. Sacrifice then not sheep and calves, but dedicate yourself to the Lord. Make yourself a holocaust. This is to offer a living sacrifice. Now listen to this part, Orthodox. Are you listening? Read this part. You must worship in truth, as former things were types, such as circumcision, whole burnt offerings and victims, and incense. They now no longer exist, but all is truth. So these Orthodox, these liars, they're like, well, it didn't really exist in the early church. They probably wanted to, but it was associated with paganism or something. Is that the reason? Is that the reason why the early Christians, is that the one they give for why they don't offer incense? Is it because it's associated with paganism? Maybe you need to read it again. You must worship in truth, as former things were types, such as circumcision. Hey, Catholics, do you guys still do physical circumcision? No. And whole burnt offerings and victims. Hey, Catholics, do you guys still offer animal sacrifices? No. Tell me, if you offered an animal sacrifice, would God accept that? No. But wait a second, Catholics, it's a type, isn't it? Don't you say God likes the types? Well, no, God doesn't want the types anymore. He puts circumcision, animal sacrifices, and incense in the same category. They now no longer exist, he says. I spoke to a priest. He goes, well, what he means is they now no longer exist in the same way. Oh, really? So physical circumcision still exists in some way? Well, no. Do whole burnt offerings and animal victims still exist in some way in the church's liturgy? No, they don't. And he goes on to name all the other things, but these are the main things. They now no longer exist. God doesn't want those things. You must worship in spirit and in truth. And all the church fathers say the same thing that John Chrysostom says here. You see how massive our quote section is? It's it's only a few thousand quotations, and they say you're quote mining. Man, I wish you guys would quote mine. I wish you would mine as much as we have. Reading the church fathers intensively for so many years. Why don't we read some Irenaeus? You want to read some Irenaeus? Let's see our quote mining. You ready? Thus, too, he imposed upon the Jewish people the construction of the tabernacle, the building of the temple, the election of the Levites, sacrifices also, and libations, legal monitions, and all the other services of the law. He does himself truly want none of these things, for he is always full of all good. That means he doesn't need any sacrifice. He doesn't need gifts. And had in himself all the odor of kindness and every perfume of sweet-smelling savors, even before Moses existed. So you notice how he's bringing up the incense. He's saying, God truly wants none of these things. Now, if you're going to play word games and say, well, he doesn't need it, and he doesn't want it, but he still lets us do it. Really? Does he let us do animal sacrifices anymore? No. Were we ever even allowed to do animal sacrifices in the first place, us Gentiles? No. Only the priests could do it. Only Levite priests could do it. You realize these Orthodox are out here offering incense, this strange fire before God that he never asked for. He never asked for any of this incense from us, from Gentiles. He allowed the Jews to do it, and when they did it, it was instructive to us because it symbolized prayer. But God doesn't want those things. You realize God was very specific when he gave the laws of incense. He said only the Levites can do it. And if you don't do it exactly as he says you're supposed to do it, he rejects it, even in the Old Testament. Yes, I like John Chrysostom too, Matt. If you want to come up and talk, you can. Look at this part. This is in the scripture. God says, whoever makes anything like the sacred incense to smell it shall be cut off from his people. So you understand, guys, you're not allowed to recreate the incense. Let's say you were really going to be recreating the incense just as it was in the Old Testament, which the Catholics don't. They make their own little concoction. But let's say you were to do it exactly as the priest did it. Well, you're not allowed to do that because you're not a priest. You understand? Only the priest can do it. And let's say you were a high priest according to the tribe of Levi, but let's say you offered incense in a strange way, God would reject that too. It says Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his censer and put fire in it and laid incense on it and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. Get it? God cursed them. He destroyed them because they offered a kind of sacrifice that he had not commanded. So the Catholics are wrong on so many levels. They claim that God still wants them to offer sacrifices of incense, just like in the Old Testament, when God forbade it. He completely forbade it for anybody who is not of the tribe of Levi. And even if you were the tribe of Levi, you have to offer incense exactly the way he said. And even then he said, if anybody who's not a Levite tries to offer it exactly the way I say, then that also is rejected if you're not from the tribe of Levi. There are like so many things that they're missing here. They're not of the tribe of Levi. They are not creating, they're not doing it the way God said. Even if they were doing it the way God said, they're not allowed to. And furthermore, the new covenant has come, and we are not to be offering the types of sacrifice anymore. We offer the actual type, the actual reality of these sacrifices, which is prayer. In Numbers, it says, a reminder to the sons of Israel so that no outsider who is not of the seed of Aaron should draw near to burn incense before the Lord. You guys are not allowed to burn incense if you're not of the tribe of Levi. That's what the Old Testament says. You're in La La Land, thinking that just anybody can come along and offer incense. But let's see how God talks about incense in the Old Testament. What is the multitude of your sacrifices to me, says the Lord? I am full of whole burnt offerings and rams, and the fat of lambs, and the blood of bulls and goats I do not desire. Not even if you came to appear before me, for who has required these things at your hands? To trample my courts. Bring no more fine flour, it is vain. Incense is an abomination to me. Your new moons and your Sabbaths and your great day I cannot bear. Your feasting and idleness, your fasting and idleness. So I would just ask these people, do you guys still offer animal sacrifices? Because they want to play this game and say, well, it's only the Jews were doing it while they were sinful. And if they had been righteous, then God would have accepted these things. Really? Are we in the old covenant right now? Are we going to keep offering animal sacrifices? He says, I'm full of whole burnt offerings. Guys, that means he's done with it. He's done with it. He only gave it to the childish Jews to teach them a lesson. Only a symbolic lesson. He doesn't want those things in themselves. He doesn't want the blood of bulls and goats. He doesn't want fine flour. And he says incense is an abomination to me. I find that incredible. He doesn't call any of those things abominations. He ends it all with only calling one of these things an abomination. It's incense. You guys think this type is acceptable to God? And you bring up Revelation. You say, but in Revelation, they're offering incense. Really? Let's examine this. Let's examine this nonsense. Let's read that part from Revelation. Protestants cannot destroy the Catholics. They're not going to be able to do it because they don't submit to the early church. You can only have the weapons to defeat all this nonsense coming out of that ridiculous Catholic and Orthodox church if you read the church fathers and obey them. So here we go. The Catholic apologists claim that since incense appears in the book of Revelation, it must be part of Christian liturgy on earth. Let's see how consistent this argument is. If we take the heavenly imagery of Revelation literally, as they suggest with incense, then we must also literally incorporate every other object or ritual seen in heaven into our worship. But they do not. It says, God in the beginning of Revelation, he says, the one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Is that literal, guys? Is that a literal physical? Is God speaking symbolically here? God says, Jesus says, I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire so that you may be rich. Is that literal gold Jesus is telling you to buy from? And white garments so that you may clothe yourself and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen. And salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. Is he talking about literal eye salve? Is that what he's talking about? Is that how you guys read the book of Revelation? Like the most symbolic, mystical book in the entire Bible? You're like, I'm going to read this all literally. And God wants literal incense too. Let's read it. And around the throne, this is the incense part. And around the throne, on each side of the throne, are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. The first living creature is like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature like the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like an eagle in flight. So are these four literal creatures in heaven? It's all literal. You know, all the church fathers say this symbolizes the four gospels. So I guess you should have these literal creatures in your liturgy. Okay, here's the important part. Then I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain. I got a question for you, Orthodox. Do you guys offer a literal lamb in liturgy? Because look, it says there's a slain lamb in heaven just before the part where they're going to offer the incense. It's like 2 verses before. So if you're saying this is a picture of liturgy and we're supposed to copy it on earth and do it literally, where is your literal slain lamb? Where is it? It's nowhere, isn't it? You'd say, well, we have the Eucharist, so we have the symbolic. You know, we don't have the type in heaven. We actually have the literal body and blood down here. Oh, right, exactly. So why are you doing the type? It's crazy. So if the incense must be literal, why don't you slay a literal lamb in your liturgy? Now listen to this part. When he taken the scroll, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, each holding a harp. A harp? Wait a second, Orthodox. I thought you said no musical instruments in liturgy. If you're supposed to be copying this here, Orthodox, where are your harps? Orthodox, where are your musical instruments in liturgy? It's literal, isn't it? All of this is literal. It's not symbolic. You're not allowed to say it's symbolic, okay? That's not symbolic incense. It's literal incense. Get the harps out. Now, how about this? Not only should you be offering a literal lamb, you should be slaying a literal lamb. Like, that's the craziest one. You obviously say that's totally symbolic and you'd be insane. And you obviously reject using musical instruments in liturgy. But guys, you just read one more verse. He says, they each had golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. It tells you what this symbolizes. And your Orthodox leaders who lie to you, who abuse you, who take advantage of you for money, they tell you that this one thing should be taken literally when it's the only thing that tells you what it symbolizes. It's the prayers of the saints. You really think that if you were to offer a filthy, stinking prayer to God, that it would be acceptable to him if you just incorporate some incense with it? You think God is manipulated like that? Like, God, I know I'm an insincere idolater. I know I practice sin, but look, I'm going to send some incense up here with it. Obviously, that's not going to improve your prayer one bit, guys. Don't delude yourselves. And if you offered up the most sincere, humble, and truthful prayer, if you were to show mercy to your enemy, forgive him of his sins, and whatever else you ought to do in your prayers, but you were to have no incense with it, do you think God is going to reject that prayer? Of course not. And they know this, and we've asked these priests, and they're like, you're right, it doesn't really improve the prayer at all. It's just something we do because it's there in Revelation. Give me a break. You're not doing anything in Revelation. You're just playing games. You're Jews, Judaizers. That's why we put it in the Judaizing section. See, let me show you. Judaizing. That's what they are. They're Judaizers, saying that we should be offering incense and that we should have temples, calling their stupid buildings temples. Look, we have a whole section on the website. All the early church fathers completely rejected having temples. God rejects temples. At what point are they going to read the scriptures or the church fathers? I mean, they don't read either one, but we let the church fathers interpret scripture for us. God says he doesn't want temples. You guys remember the story in scripture? Should I read this? Should we go over temples briefly? How much time do we have? Okay, we'll go over it. You guys remember David wants to build a temple to God. And he tells Samuel, the prophet, he says, I want to build a big temple to God. I'm sure he's going to like it. And Samuel says, go do it. Go do everything that's in your heart. But then it says it happened that night that the word of the Lord came to Nathan saying, go and say to my servant David, thus says the Lord, you shall not build me. You shall not build me a house for me to dwell in. For I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought up the sons of Israel out of Egypt until this day. But I have been in a lodging and in a tent, in all the places through which I walked among all Israel. Did I ever speak to one of the tribes of Israel when I commanded to shepherd, whom I commanded to shepherd my people, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? God saying, have you ever heard me complain that I don't have a house? And the Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will build you a house, and it shall come to pass when your days are fulfilled and you sleep with your fathers, that I will raise up your seed after you, who will come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. Now, guys, they think God is talking about Solomon here, but really it's a prophecy about Jesus. Jesus is the one who's going to raise up the temple. He is going to bring about his own resurrection and the resurrection of all of us. He's going to renew us in baptism and give us the pledge of eternal life in that picture of baptism, which is a picture of resurrection. So God's saying, my servant who's going to come from you, it's really talking about the Messiah, he is going to establish his kingdom. He will build a house for my name, and I will establish his throne forever. Is that talking about Solomon? It's Jesus. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. Again, this is quoted in the New Testament as referring to Christ. But then they say, David goes, all right, I'm gonna do it. And then Solomon comes after him, and Solomon says, I want to build you a house made out of wood blocks. I want to make some wood and stone blocks for you, God. See, Solomon was a wise man, but he was still in that old covenant, still performing the types. And God let him do it, not willingly. Read what all the church fathers say. They say God never wanted it. He only tolerated it. In the New Testament, we do not have temples. It is a heresy, Orthodox. Listen to me, Orthodox Catholics. It is a heresy to call your building a temple. God has rejected that. He does not want that. Let me read it to you. There's the Epistle of Barnabas. I can't tell you how many times we've gone to the Orthodox. Like, we go into these servers and we'll like quote from the Epistle of Barnabas, and it'll be like, that's a medieval forgery. Like, priests, get on top of things. Start telling your catechumens to read the Epistle of Barnabas. They're so ill-informed. They think that there's only one Barnabas, and it's that fake gospel created in medieval times. Why aren't any of the Orthodox catechumens reading the Apostolic Fathers? Okay, here we go. Here's Barnabas. He says, let us be spiritually minded. Let us be a perfect temple to God. For my brethren, the habitation of our heart is a holy temple to the Lord. Moreover, I will also tell you concerning the temple, how the wretched Jews, wandering in error, trusted not in God himself, but in the temple, as being the house of God. For almost after the manner of the Gentiles, they worshipped him in the temple. But learn how the Lord speaks when abolishing it. What? God abolished having a temple? Who has meted out heaven with a span and the earth with his palm? Have not I? Thus said the Lord, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build to me? Or what is the place of my rest? So they're quoting it. They're saying God has abolished a temple. Not just the Jewish temple, but having a temple built by hands. God doesn't dwell in that. God dwells in your body. He says, you are a perfect temple to God. And what are the Catholics doing? They're taking half of your money, half of the money that you give in donations to any Orthodox or Catholic church, guys, goes to paying the mortgage on a big building. And the carnally minded people are all excited to see a building that has beautiful paintings on the wall and a big domed ceiling. Complete nonsense. Now, if anybody wants to come up here, let's see the live chat. Anybody in the live chat speaking? They're saying, Luke, you're missing the live chat. All right, what's going on in the live chat? Matt, I don't know. I don't know who these people are. Are they on the early church side or are they on Catholic side? There are a lot of people talking. Anybody who wants to come up here, come and talk with us. Check the stream and see who's talking. Look, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to go through the list and show you the heresies. There's many more, but I mean, go read the church fathers. They all completely reject having temples. They're very explicit about it. I just read you Irenaeus saying the construction of the tabernacle, the building of the temple, he does himself truly want none of these things. What do the Catholics do? They're right back to it. God wants a temple. And they steal half your money to pay for it. And then they brag about how it costs millions of dollars just so that they can have their own little castle. That's what it is. Every priest wants to have his own little castle that he's proud of. And he feels like it's his. He lords it over everybody. This is my house. And, numerous Orthodox teach evolution now. We see apologists like Jonathan Pajot. And I know Callistus Ware died. Yeah, we got a comment saying, Callistus Ware, he's dead now. Oh, I see. So the fact that he taught evolution, it just doesn't even matter. He's still one of the most respected Orthodox teachers. We're just gonna act like you can't condemn him after he died, right? You guys would never do that. By the way, you Orthodox would never do that, like condemning somebody after they died, right? You never do that. Not like with Origen. So he's already dead. We can't condemn something wicked that he taught. I see. Yes, you can. Why don't you condemn Darwinian evolution? They're like, well, we don't have an official teaching in our church. When are you going to have an official teaching? How long does it take? We show them the heresies of their church, how they completely contradict the early church. And they say, well, it's not an official teaching. So it's okay if we contradict what the early church taught because we haven't officially declared what the early church taught to be official. Really? How long does it take? 2,000 years? 2,000 years later. You're like, you Protestants, by the way, we're not Protestants. We abhor Protestantism. We're saying you guys are Protestant. But anyway, you say to the Protestants, you think it's your job to come along 2,000 years later and just figure out Christianity? You don't have to figure out Christianity. It's already been figured out. And then you turn around when people are saying, hey, your church completely contradicts the early church. And you say, well, nothing has been dogmatically defined. Mary's sinlessness, it's not a dogma yet. So it's okay if all the church fathers contradict that. And, half the church can have their opinion and the other half can contradict it. And it's fine. It's okay. When's your church going to dogmatically define it? But just so you know, you're delusional. It has been dogmatically defined. If the consensus of the early church teaches something, that's dogmatically defined. That's the official teaching of the church. When they say, well, show us the council, that's nonsense. You have official teachings in the church apart from the councils. You think that there were no official teachings in the church until the Council of Nicaea? Are you okay, Orthodox? Are you okay? So when Arius was teaching Arianism, he wasn't actually a heretic because no council had officially outlawed that and condemned it. Is that correct? So he wasn't a heretic. And all the people who called Arius a heretic, they were all wrong to do that because no council had officially declared it. Is that how that works? So like the sacraments, those were not official doctrines in the church until the Council of Nicaea. The Council of Nicaea didn't even talk about sacraments. So when did the sacraments become official doctrines? It's so stupid, guys. Of course, there are official doctrines in the church. The consensus of the early church is a dogmatic teaching. Dogmatic. You don't even understand the meaning of that word dogma. As Nolan made a video on the channel, dogma just means you're strict, you're hard-nosed about something. You're not going to compromise on it. He said this is something we're going to excommunicate you over. The Catholic, the early church, they had their dogmas. The heretics had their dogmas. It just means something that you're not going to budge on. And in the early church, they'd excommunicate you for a lot of these things that the Catholics and Orthodox are doing, like going to war, like divorcing and remarrying multiple times, like worshiping images, like doing a simony, charging people for baptism. You'd be completely kicked out of the church. If they caught you Judaizing, burning incense and having temples and saying, we've got priestly vestments like the Old Testament, they'd kick you out. They'd say you're just a Judaizer. They didn't have vestments. They didn't have that. You can go read the account of Cyprian's martyrdom in the mid-200s. They actually include what he was wearing. It even says that the pagans, the Romans, were kind of surprised at what Cyprian was wearing because he was out in hiding, And they say he was just wearing a regular white tunic. And they're like, well, that's weird. Why is he's a priest, isn't he? He's a bishop of all of Carthage. Wow. He's just wearing a regular tunic. That's weird. Yeah, that's how they dressed. There's nothing fancy. That's how it was for centuries. In fact, you can read the Second Council of Nicaea forbidding priests to wear fancy clothing. Well, we've got too much stuff. Shall we jump over? I'll read you fancy dresses since we're on that subject. Talking about Judaizing and effeminacy. Here, can you see my screen? Everybody see my screen? Here, I'm jumping over. Here we go. Boom. And I'm gassy. Of course I'm gassy because I talk a lot. Some people get gassy when they talk. I'm sorry. That's me. Oh, wait. That's the wrong button. Okay, here we go. Can you see? This is the Second Council of Nicaea, Canon 16. Even at that time, guys, they were not allowing the stuff that they allow in the Catholic and Orthodox Church, which they claim is apostolic, or really they claim it goes back to the Jews. There we go. Canon 16. All buffoonery and decking of the body ill becomes the priestly rank. Therefore, those bishops and clerics who array themselves in gay and showy clothing ought to correct themselves. And if they do not amend, they ought to be subjected to punishment. What is gay and showing clothing? If only they told us. Oh, wait, they do. Get ready. For from early times, here, let me read this. For from early times, every man in holy orders wore modest and grave clothing. And verily, whatever is worn, not so much because of necessity, as for the sake of outward show, savors of dandyism, as says Basil the Great. Nor did anyone array himself in raiment embroidered with silk, nor put many-colored ornaments on the border of his garments. For they had heard from the lips of God that they that wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. So here's the epitome. This just means the summary. Bishops and clergymen arraying themselves in splendid clothes and anointed with perfumes must be corrected. Should they persist, they must be punished. So even in the 700s, even the idolaters are saying, we're going to make sure in one of our canons we remind them they're not allowed to be doing this. The priests are not allowed to wear these fancy clothes with embroidered silk. Nowadays, that's just standard, guys, with any priestly garment. It's all embroidered, it's all silk, it's all multicolored, many colored ornaments on the borders of their garments. Have you seen Orthodox priests' garments? Like, nobody's even reading the canons. This didn't exist in the 700s, or if it did, it was being condemned. Too ridiculous. It's amazing when we talk to the Catholics, they'll say stuff like, but you don't accept that council. So yeah, so what? Do you understand what an argument is? Like, you understand? I don't need to accept this council in order to prove you are contradicting your own church. That's why I'm bringing it up to you. Of course I don't accept that council. Can't believe how many times we've had to say that to people. You don't accept that council. So yeah, but you do accept that council and you have to obey it. Our point is that your church is developing over centuries. It's doing things that were condemned, and it's condemning things that were approved in the early church. That's our point. And you keep lying to people and saying, well, this goes all the way back to the beginning. Image worship doesn't go to the beginning. Offering incense in liturgy does not go to the beginning. That's one of the most fundamental things. You realize you're telling people, you're not really worshiping God properly. You need to worship him with incense. That's how he wants to be worshiped. Go back to the Old Testament. And then you read the church fathers and they say, we do not use incense. God hates it. He actually considers it an abomination, as bad as animal sacrifices and physical circumcision. He hates it. It's the complete opposite. It's not that God requires these things. He hates them, guys. You are requiring things that God absolutely abhors and forbids. That's why we're not with the Catholics. That's why we're not with the Orthodox. Let's keep going. Let's go to the next one. What's the next big heresy of these people? What's the next big reason we cannot be with them? And neither should you. They allow Darwinian evolution. And again, they'll lie and say, well, we haven't dogmatically taught anything, even though the early church did officially outlaw this. It was called Epicureanism in the beginning. Epicurus taught this idea that the church made itself over time, and all these atoms just randomly smashed into each other, and the earth made itself over many, many eons. The church said that's completely false. That's fake. God really did create the earth in 6 days. False ordinations, government interference. I mean, that is a massive subject to go into. But the church made canons completely forbidding government authorities, secular authorities, princes, kings, from choosing bishops. And that went from something that was forbidden to being a requirement. Even in Constantine's day, the bishops would not be chosen without the emperor's approval. And by the time you get to Theodosius in the late 300s, when Theodosius has that big council in Constantinople, it's crazy, guys. You should just look up. Google it, Council of Constantinople, read any article on it, read Wikipedia. You can also read the actual historical accounts, which we do, and just see what happened at that council, guys. This is what happened. The emperor, Theodosius, calls together all the bishops. He says, all right, guys, we're not going to do Arianism anymore. We're going to make Christianity, Nicene Christianity, the official religion of the empire. And all these bishops who are here, most of them were Arians. And they all decided to become Nicene bishops because he told them to. He said, it's time to abandon Arianism. And they said, yes, sir, we're going to do it. And he said, all right, now we need a bishop of Constantinople, because Gregory of Nazianzus just resigned over, he was tired of the councils. He was absolutely sick of the church, and who can blame him? So he resigned, which was extraordinary. That pretty much did not happen at all in church history, somebody resigning. You either died or you got martyred. But he was done with it. Gregory of Nazianzus was finished with it. It was less than a year, and he stepped down from it, from all the crazy stuff he had to deal with. So Emperor Theodosius says, all right, we're going to choose a new bishop to preside over this council of Constantinople. And he says, all right, draw me up a list of all your best candidates who I will choose. He says, I'm going to choose who the bishop is going to be, but I'm going to do it based on your recommendation. And they're like, oh, he's a good guy. He's going to follow the canons. He's going to let us choose him because that's our job, not the emperor's job. So they wrote up a list of all the candidates. They put the top guys at the top, and they included actually everybody who's present at the council in this document. And the people at the very bottom were people who were not even baptized. They were just soldiers and officers and stuff. And so there was one of the officers in there. He was not even a Christian. He's not even baptized. He was at the bottom of the list, but he's one of the officers of the emperor. And he goes, oh, there's this guy Nectarius. I already decided I want him to be bishop. And they said, well, emperor, what are you talking about? He's not even a Christian. He's not even a presbyter. He's not even a deacon. We can't ordain him to be the bishop. And he goes, do it. And they're like, oh, okay, okay. We baptize you, we ordain you deacon, presbyter, patriarch. Okay, there we did it. And it was just back to all the old tricks during the Arian crisis. Emperor is in charge of who's going to be bishop. Total corruption. It used to be that the person who's going to be bishop was elected by the entire church. Everybody would choose him. And then the bishops would lay hands on him and ordain him. You don't have that in the church anymore. You don't have that in modern day. You definitely didn't have it back then when the emperors were ruling. Nowadays, people are just told, hey, you've got yourself a new priest. Or, oh, that's great. Who the heck is he? We don't even know who he is. What's his background? Is he a righteous man? Is he the husband of one wife, like Paul says? Does he have his household in order? Are all his children righteous? No. Well, actually, you're never even going to find out. But no. How about Josiah Trenum? You guys ever looked up the stuff? We're not going to be a gossip channel or anything, but you guys ever looked up Josiah's past, like what's going on with his family? The crazy, scandalous stuff going on in his family? That guy would never be a priest in the early church, ever. With the scandal going on with his kids and the stuff his kids say about him and the accusations they make against him. Wouldn't go on, wouldn't fly in the early church. So anyway, false ordinations, absolutely despicable that the church allowed emperors to interfere. By the way, right after that council where he chose Nectarius, a guy who wasn't even a Christian, to be the bishop of Constantinople and to preside over the council, right after that, everybody at that council convened at a separate place right after, and they said, are we going to accept that? Are we going to accept that crazy ordination? That broke every single canon of the church. And they were about to have a council to make it void. They were going to make that ordination void. And then the emperor said, actually, no, you're not going to do that. And they're like, okay, break it up. And nothing came of it. The emperor did not want them. He actually sent some people to talk to them about it and say, you better not. We don't know the details of what happened because a lot of that stuff is lost to history. But man, just so much corruption. What a farce when we hear the Catholics say things like, it's a conspiracy theory when people say things changed after Nicaea. You're weird people. You're conspiracy theorists when you prioritize the early church, the pre-Nicene church. Nothing changed after Nicaea, okay? Nothing changed. I mean, okay, a few things changed. Maybe the whole church did fall into mass apostasy during the Arian crisis. That may have happened. Okay, but besides complete mass apostasy that lasted for decades, nothing changed after Nicaea, okay? It was just Athanasius against the world, against all the emperors, all the bishops falling into apostasy. But listen, the post-Nicene church was really strong. It was really great. It was equal. In fact, it was better than the Ante-Nicene church. You weirdos, why are you reading the Ante-Nicene fathers? The Ante-Nicene church was the greatest church. The Ante-Nicene church was the purest church. The Ante-Nicene fathers lived during a time when you couldn't be a Christian unless you were ready to die. You're going to sacrifice everything. Post-Nicene church, you got a bunch of pagans becoming Christians because it's popular, because their emperor did it. A lot of insincere people. And that's why you have absolute chaos. When are you guys going to start reading the church fathers? Please, I beg you, read the church fathers. And it's not just me reading it either. I'm part of a group of a lot of people that read the church fathers. We reinforce each other's knowledge because we're always fact-checking each other. We're going through all the documents. We're reading through all the centuries. We've gotten to around the 500s. But we exhaustively read them. We want to know what they taught from the beginning, and we want to know how it changed over time. Don't you want to know that, viewer? Orthodox, Catholic. Don't you want to know what the church taught from the beginning? How are you ever supposed to know what the truth is if you don't start from the beginning? You cannot assume, if you just start reading somebody in the 500s, that guy's teachings match the original. They don't. Not on a bunch of topics. There are things that the church teaches right now that you would be completely excommunicated for in the early church. Not just one thing, not two things, not three, not four, not five, not six, not seven, not 10, not 15, not 20, not 30. We're talking like 40 things. It's a list of about 40 things. That's why you made this list here. Let's go to the next one. False ordinations. What about this one, guys? This is the thing that has somehow become the most talked about aspect of Ante-Nicene Christianity on our channel. Everybody thinks we're making this up. I mean, we had a big debate with Joseph Sweden. Go watch it. Link it in the description. Drop it here, Brian or Raheem or anybody. The early church really did require women to dress with a complete veil on their body, covering their arms, legs, shoulders, neck, head, and face. Everything was covered. If they were in public. If they're around their family members, they didn't have to do that. And most women kept most of their time in houses. So, the actual percentage of time that they were wearing a face veil was pretty low. By the way, I say face veil to help you guys understand what I'm talking about. Back then, they just call it a veil. Nowadays, we have to specify, oh, it's over the face. Back then, they said veil, and everybody knew what that meant. You're covering your face. They're like, why doesn't Paul say face when he says, head should be katacalypto? Because katacalypto means completely covered from top to bottom. Katacalypto. He could have said calypto. That means hide. He could have said women need to hide their head. But he left no doubt about what he means. Complete veiling, katacalypto, and all the church fathers teach it. Why don't we see what the church fathers teach? Why don't we go over that? This is one of the reasons we cannot be in their church and why they couldn't be in the early church, because they don't teach this doctrine. On the contrary, every single priest we talk to, all the Orthodox, they condemn something that was universally required. You read Hippolytus, you read Apostolic Constitutions, you read others, they specify that women couldn't even come for the Eucharist if their heads were not covered. They said, if we see immodest women coming in here, we're not even going to give you the Eucharist. And they considered face to be a veil. Face must be covered. Now, one of the reasons Paul doesn't specify face, again, is because he wants everything covered. So if you're just covering the face, but then you've got arms and legs and neck exposed, you're not katacalypto. Katacalypto means completely covered. That's the word Paul uses in 1 Corinthians 11. Let me show you a few examples in scriptures or in the church fathers. Here we go. Shepherd of Hermas. So somebody's texting me. Let's see what they're saying. Who's speaking? People. Okay, we're going to keep going. Shepherd of Hermas. Hermas says, a virgin meets me, or adorned as if she were proceeding from the bridal chamber, clothed entirely in white and with white sandals, and veiled up to her forehead, and her head was covered by a hood. Now, this is not my translation, guys. This is their translation. So, veiled up to her forehead, and her head was covered by a hood. Somebody might say, well, I don't think the face is being covered. Well, notice how emphasis is on the forehead. See, a lot of these women, they'd pull something down like this. It would be like a big hood and come down. Now, they would also wrap their faces. They're different veiling styles. But forehead is in focus here. They pull this hood down. That's how most of them would veil. It would go down like right here over the eyes, and they could look up to see as they're walking. They really didn't need to see like the horizon in order to walk and see where they're going. But they would always look down while walking in public. So really, you couldn't see anything. That was the most common way to veil. But women would also wrap themselves. We're going to show you lots of church fathers saying that. And by the way, keep this in mind. Somebody's going to say, well, this is only married women because it says the bridal chamber. Well, actually, he says a virgin meets me as if proceeding from the bridal chamber. It's actually ambiguous whether it's talking about married or not, but you're going to see it's across the board. Paul says women, not just virgins, not just married women, but just women, the sex of women, they must be veiled if they're adults. Here's Irenaeus. By the way, this is just a short preview. This isn't all our quotations. This is a short preview. Once you scroll down, you're going to see it's hundreds. Irenaeus says, in the same epistle, when Paul says a woman ought to have a veil upon her head because of the angels, Moses rendered manifest when he put a veil upon his face. Do you notice anything interesting going on here? Paul says a woman ought to have a veil on her head. Moses rendered manifest when he put a veil upon his face. It's almost like the veil that Moses wore is the same one that Paul commands them to wear. Here's Clement of Alexandria, just 4 little excerpts. Let the woman observe this further. Let her be entirely covered, unless she happen to be at home. Nor will she invite another to fall into sin by uncovering her face. See, a veil is over the face, and it's for modesty. Only reason Paul brings it up in the context of prayer is because the women were taking off their veils during prayer. They were taking off their veils when they were coming in the church. And Paul was saying, that is indecent. Clement says, it has also been commanded that the head should be veiled and the face covered. But by no manner of means, oh, by the way, read this next part. For it is a wicked thing for beauty to be a snare to men. So what's the emphasis? Women must cover their beauty. Women must be considerate to their brothers and also to their neighbors and not entice them. God made women to be very beautiful. And the beauty of a woman is meant to be given as a gift to her husband. It is not something she shares with the whole world. Her family, they grow up, they get to see how beautiful she is as they grow up, or, the kids and whatever. But it is a gift she gives to her husband. Nobody else has seen her but her closest relatives. And, there are a lot of women in those ancient times, not even just Christians, but a lot of women who would hide themselves even from their closest relatives as much as they could, cousins and whatnot. That's a very admirable thing to do. Here again is Clement, but by no manner of means are women to be allotted to uncover and exhibit any part of their person, lest both fall, the men by being excited to look, they by drawing on to themselves the eyes of the men. A wife should be avoiding frequent departures from the house and shutting herself up as far as possible from the view of all not related to her. Clement of Alexandria is pretty explicit, I'd say. Here's Tertullian. He wrote in multiple books on veiling. One of them is called On the Veiling of Virgins. He says, God bids you be veiled. I believe he does so for fear the heads of some should be seen. Now you're going to see. He says head and face. In fact, he specifies catacalypto means something is draped on the head and it falls down, covers the face. So yes, guys, we know there's a distinction between the head and the face, but when the head is veiled, the face is covered. So perilous a face, then, ought to be hidden. For who will have the audacity to intrude with his eyes upon a shrouded face? Emphasis on face. In fact, why don't we jump over real quick to Ambrose, because nobody believes. Here's Ambrose. He says, let custom itself teach us. A woman covers her face with a veil for this reason, that in public her modesty may be safe. But if she cover her head with a veil, that she may not accidentally see or be seen, for when the head is veiled, the face is hidden. How much more ought she to cover herself with the veil of modesty, so as even in public to have her own secret place? Is this not a crazy quote? It's so explicit. You'd think it was generated by ChatGPT or something. It's so crazy. I always wonder, like, somebody's going to think this is made by ChatGPT, but go look it up, guys. It's real. He actually says this. If she cover her head with a veil that she may not actually accidentally see or be seen, for when the head is veiled, the face is hidden. Wow. It's crazy. I looked it up in the Latin. Crazy. He really does say that. That's not our translation, by the way. Most of this is taken from other people's translations on New Advent and whatnot. But let's read some more. Let's read Tertullian or Origen. Origen has a commentary on the Song of Psalms or Song of Songs, where the church is speaking to Christ in the person of Solomon's wife speaking to Solomon. It's very symbolic, and it talks about modesty norms back then, and those modesty norms they're still what Paul is referring to in 1 Corinthians 11. Remember, Paul was a Jew. The bridegroom asks her when she comes to that place which he has just specified as being more secluded, to lay aside her veil and show her face to him. She walks thus veiled and covered, however, because she ought to have a power over her head because of the angels. Whoa! So Origen connects face veiling with having power on the head because of the angels, which is what Paul commands. Women ought to be veiled. They ought to have a veil on the head because of the angels. Some translations say power over the head. Some say a veil on the head, but it's both referring to the same thing. And then as he commentates on this, he says that Solomon's wife says, I show not my naked face to any except you only. In this way, with assured confidence and with not only the face uncovered, but also the head. So he makes a distinction. This is another one, a commentary on Ezekiel. Yes, guys, Origen knows there's a difference between face and head, but he still thinks women need to veil the face. Here's Hippolytus. This is apostolic tradition. He says, and let all the women have their heads covered with an opaque cloth, not with a veil of thin linen, for this is not a true covering. You see the emphasis on having a true covering, guys. See, the Catholics, they say, well, we've got these little lacy things and we call it a veil, so what's your problem? We've got veils. You realize the early church emphasizes you have to have a true veil. There's fake veil and there's real veil. If it's transparent, you can see right through it. It's not a real veil. You're going to see that repeatedly with the church fathers. They don't just say anything you plop on your head counts as a veil. They say, make sure you have a true veil. Now listen to his commentary on Daniel, where he talks about Susanna. And Susanna was veiled. And absolutely nobody denies that Susanna is veiled. But let's see what Hippolytus says. The lawless ones commanded her to be unveiled, for she was covered, in order that they may be filled with her beauty. Let us consider, beloved, of what evil this action was. For while the apostle said a woman ought to have a veil upon her head on account of the angels, these men did the opposite. They commanded that she be unveiled in front of the people, and at this they were not ashamed. So he says Susanna's veil is the same kind of veil that Paul, the apostle, says women need to wear. And it's explicit in the scriptures. It is a face veil. And nobody even denies that. All these church fathers believe that this Old Testament veiling practice continues in the New. All the women must be veiled. They believe it's common decency. They actually connect it, like Ambrose, he connects it to God's law when he says that men and women are not to exchange clothing. They say this is talking about veiling. Men are not to dress like women and veil their faces, which sometimes men did. The Greeks did that. We know that from history. They did that when they prayed. They would actually pull a thing down over their face when they prayed. We've done a lot of documentation on that. We've got a huge documentary about it, multi-part, which we encourage you guys to watch. But this is a standard of modesty. Imagine, guys, you walk into these Orthodox churches and you're surrounded by these women who are not only unveiling their faces, these young women, all of them looking, either either already marriageable age and married or looking for somebody. They're all showing off. Imagine this. I mean, you're under attack. You're being bombarded by this, and not just unveiling the face, but also with all the makeup, all the jewelry, all the fancy hair. And these Catholic, I tell you, these priests are so disgusting. They tell these women, wear a dress. It's more modest. And then they don't even mention what kind of dress they gotta wear. Like it's like up past the knee. You're like seeing more than half the leg, and they're like, wear a dress. It's more modest. Yeah, we know what you priests are after. And then meanwhile, the priest is wearing a a true dress. I mean, the priests all wear something that goes all the way down to the feet. The priests are dressed more modestly than the women. And the women are showing half their leg. And they've got all their arms exposed, and they've got their neck. What is it with these shirts, by the way? These shirts that are like V-neck. They're like, well, it's women's clothing, so automatically it needs to show more. It should be the complete opposite. Men are the ones that don't need to be covering up completely. You go to the store to buy some clothing. What do you see? Women's shorts. What is the only distinction between men's shorts and women's shorts? Do you know what it is? Women's shorts are shorter. And what's the distinction between a man's shirt and a woman's shirt nowadays? It's the woman's shirt reveals more. It's tighter, and it's got this big V thing. What's the difference between men and women's jeans? By the way, women should never be wearing jeans, obviously. But it's just that the women's jeans are much tighter so that they reveal the form. And guys, if you think that culture determines modesty standards in God's eyes, that God's standard of modesty just evolves with culture, you're dreaming. God has one standard of modesty. It's this one. Women are to be completely covered. It's for their own good, too. It's for their own protection. It's also for keeping the stability of civilization, preserving the fabric of a marriage, that a woman is not showing herself to other people all the time, other men. She's not enticing a man's brothers to lust after her. You realize what that does to a man's relationship with his wife and with his brothers? That he's showing off his wife all the time and trying to make his brothers jealous. It's terrible. You guys are causing the adulteries that are happening. This is a very important doctrine. I'm not going to attend a church where a priest allows all these women to dress like this. I'm not going to subject my children to it. I'm not going to subject my sons to it. I'm not going to subject my daughters to it, to an environment like that. I'm not going to subject myself to it, guys. Guys, we're living in an age. Almost everybody has been addicted to pornography before, myself included. I can't be in that environment. All these women like that. I'm not going to do it. It's outrageous that they expect that of us. It's bad enough just going to the grocery store. But on Sundays, these women, they think it's time to dress up, get into the full harlot garb, and these wicked priests, they're like, wear a dress. Yeah, I know you priests. I know what you're all about. While you're wearing the actual dress. You gay dudes. You are really gay. You are homosexuals, you priests. Long hair, long dress, you're gay. You're like, we don't ordain women priests in our church. We just all grow our hair out long like a girl. And then we wear all this jewelry and embroidered silk clothes and dresses, long sleeves that go all the way down to the feet. What a joke. And according to them, a veil doesn't even cover the face. It's just something you plop on the top of the head. So according to their standard, they're also veiled. Of course, it's too ridiculous to even entertain. Obviously, it's not a veil. But according to them, they are veiled. So, I mean, they're just girls through and through, according to their own standard. But they're not. It's just so wicked. You can't even look a picture of an Orthodox liturgy without seeing all these women dressed like this, showing off their legs. You should read this section we have on veiling that I'm reading to you. Read this. Read what the church fathers say. They say not even the arms should be shown. Absolutely nothing should be shown. When's part 3 of the veiling series coming up? As soon as I can. Maybe I'll record it right after this. I'm sorry, we've been busy. Okay, I'm just going to read a couple more. Here, we'll read Apostolic Constitutions. When you are in the street, cover your head. He's talking to the women. For by such a covering, you will avoid being viewed of idle persons. Look downward when you walk abroad, veiling yourself as becomes women. See, when they would look down, the hood would fall down so that they couldn't be seen. They could also wrap their face. That was also allowed. She is to veil her face and conceal it with modesty from strange men. Apostolic Constitutions, Book 1, Section 3. Fact check us. Go see if it's all real. It's all real. Athanasius. This is one of the pseudo-Athanasius letters. They're not sure if it's Athanasius, but who cares? If it's somebody else, that's cool. If you should by chance meet someone, let your face be veiled. Lower your gaze and do not lift your face toward a man, but only toward your God. Here's one of his pastoral letters on virginity. He says, Mary was therefore a pure virgin. She did not desire to be seen by men. Instead, she remained diligently at home, living a life of seclusion like a honeybee. She left no part of her body uncovered. So, guys, if this is the standard for all these women, I want to ask you something, Orthodox. Do you think Mary was the least modest virgin in church history, in Jewish history? That's quite an insult if you were to say such a thing. Mary was definitely at the highest modesty standard. I'm not going to say she was the most modest, because I think there have been women that are like Mary. I believe there are women that were inspired by Mary and completely covered themselves and kept themselves secluded. So I'm not going to say Mary was necessarily the most modest, but I'd say there couldn't have ever been somebody more modest than Mary. And so if we know this is how women dressed, this was common, this is what was expected in the church, then of course Mary was dressed like this. And you Catholics just cannot stand it. You cannot believe it. And we know we're being controversial when we go on Twitter and we make a description that says Mary wore a burqa. And you think we're just stepping on your toes and trying to annoy you or something. But it's true. It's supposed to be shocking. It is there for shock value, definitely. But it's also a test. It's a test to see how much you care about the truth. And whether you, in your perverted mindset that's been passed down to you, this is your heritage, not the true faith, but just perversion. That's what you've adopted. That's what you've received from these wicked priests. It's a test to see if you will love modesty and chastity more than what these people are selling you. How can anybody speak evil things about modesty? The worst thing you ought to be able to say is, wow, that's a really extreme version of modesty that's not required of everybody, but I respect it. Even that alone should tell you Mary did it, because we know Mary was extremely modest. She wasn't looking for attention like the women in all these churches. There's a lot in here. Look at John Chrysostom. What is this modest apparel? Such attire as covers them completely. He signifies that not at the time of prayer only, but also continually, she ought to be covered. So where is this practice, guys? Where do the Catholics do this? They are such liars. They all call it a prayer veil. It is not a prayer veil. It is not for prayer. Paul mentioning prayer is only incidental. It was only because women were taking off their veils during prayer and men were putting it on, which they even acknowledge as far as the men goes. They say, well, in Greek culture, the men would veil themselves during prayer. Yeah, and the women were taking off their veils during prayer. Paul is not saying put on this veil at the time of prayer. He's saying quit taking it off during prayer. Keep it on. When you're in public, women, keep your veil on. That's why he says, because of the angels. The early church fathers unanimously taught that the angels of God came down as human beings and lusted after women and fell into sin with those women. And all women are expected to veil throughout history. All cultures require their women to veil because of that event. Because women's beauty was so dangerous, it caused even the angels to fall into lust. And so every culture observes this law. It's a law of nature now. Men cover their wives. But it was recently abandoned and lost and forgotten. But they still have vestiges of it. You see in these wedding ceremonies, they still do this little act. They put on a little act where the bride puts on a veil. It's the first time she's ever worn a veil. And she walks up there, and she's got her veil, and then he says, "You may now kiss the bride," and he lifts up her veil, and he pretends he's seeing her for the first time. Well, in ancient times, that was really the first time he ever saw her. It's the first time. And by the way, he did not do that in public. He did not unveil his wife in front of everybody. The unveiling ceremony was actually in her father's house, and only her relatives were nearby. So, yeah. So we still have a reminder of it. You should sense that something's off, something's weird going on. What is this veiling ceremony we do? Nowadays, they don't even do the face veil at weddings anymore. You ever notice that? Sometimes they'll put a little lace thing on the back and they'll say, yeah, that's a veil. That's not a veil. It just gets smaller and smaller. Yeah, that alone should convince you all this stuff is changing over time. It just gets worse and worse. Something on the back of your head is not a veil. Something on the top of your head, this is not a veil. It has to come down. That's what kata calypto means. Go read. It says, and the veil of the temple was torn from top to kato, which means bottom. When Paul says kata calypto, he doesn't mean the veil starts at the top and stays at the top. He means it goes all the way down. Kato doesn't just mean down. It means all the way down to the floor. Anyway, yeah. John Chrysostom, Gregory Nazianzus, he does this wonderful oration on his sister after she dies. He says, who is more deserving of renown, and yet who avoided it so much and made herself inaccessible to the eyes of man? Listen, you women addicted to ease and display, who despise the veil of shamefacedness. Same word Paul uses. What's the purpose of a veil, according to Gregory? Well, it makes you inaccessible to the eyes of man. Makes it so that nobody can see you. But they all say it, all of them. I'll read you one more, and then you have to go and read this for yourself. This is just the short preview, by the way. This isn't all the quotes we have. There are hundreds. This is just the short little condensed one. We just took some really juicy bits. Here's Jerome. He's speaking to a virgin, and he's saying, this is the kind of women that you should hang out with. These are the only kind of women you should hang out with. He says, you should choose for your companions staid and serious women, particularly widows and virgins, persons of approved conversation, of few words, and of a holy modesty, who veils all her face except her eyes and only uses these to find her way. Wow. Was Jerome a Muslim? They're Muslims. Just can't believe it. We're not actually offended. You guys can call us Muslims. That's fine. Islam is a satanic religion. But you only convict yourselves when you let the Muslims outdo you in modesty. That's a stinging indictment on you. So go ahead, be worse than the Muslims. The Muslims didn't even get it from Christianity, by the way. It was a worldwide practice. That's why Paul says, does not even nature itself teach you? Nature teaches you this, that women should be hidden. Men naturally hide their wives and their daughters. Don't want people to be seeing them. This is a massive heresy. Also, we talk about veiling, guys. Just go see what the church fathers say about makeup. As if we were so extreme with veiling. You guys, the Catholics are so far off, they wouldn't even accept what the church fathers say about makeup and jewelry, because that was also forbidden. They said it's harlotry, it's prostitution. They never even mention makeup ever without bringing up prostitution. And the only women that are wearing makeup in the Old Testament are women who are trying to entice men. Fact check me. Now, I know there are a couple of righteous women that do it. I know there's Judith, but it literally tells you why she did it, so that she could kill Holofernes. She said, I killed him with my face. She says that. It's a brutal line. She says, I killed him. Yeah. She seduced him, and then she chopped his head off because he was smitten with the beauty of her face, it says. Effeminate priest, this is a heresy. Go read the Rudder. They're like, you're so strict. Why would you say that having long hair is effeminate? At least these priests grow out a big beard, Luke and Nolan and everybody. At least the priests grow out their beard, so it's not really effeminate. Really. No, it's still effeminate. Tons of church fathers talk about this. John Chrysostom, Augustine, Epiphanius, we've got a lot, Jerome. They're all bashing these monks who are doing this. They had big beards, but they were also growing long hair, and they're saying this is forbidden. Paul expressly forbids it. Why are you doing this? Go read this section. It's quite long. This is a heresy. We don't have enough time to go over all these. But even the Rudder, go read the Rudder, your big document, the big compilation of all the canons of the church, compiled by Nicodemus the Hagirite, who, by the way, requires veiling the way we're describing. He says, those two incur the excommunication of this canon who do not put a razor to their head at all, nor cut the hair of their head, but let it grow long enough to reach to the belt, like that of women. Excommunication for having long hair? Yeah. Yes, actually. That's a heresy. It's a heresy. And it's no laughing matter. It's serious. Effeminate weirdos. What's wrong with you? Cut your hair. All the Orthodox, it's like a big fad now. You ever notice they all want to have long hair? Like, I'm so epic. I'm so cool. I got long hair like a girl. You ever read Revelation where it says the creatures that come out of the pit, they have long hair like women, it says. Like women. You ever notice how the only people who have long hair in the Bible, they die because of it? The only men who have long hair, they die because of it. Absalom grows out his hair. And it makes a big deal out of it. It says, and Absalom never cut his hair. He only cut his hair once, a year or something like that? And it talks about how long his hair gets. And then how does Absalom die in the Bible? You ever read it? He's on a horse and he gets caught in the tree limbs and he hangs by his hair and then he gets impaled. You know, the Bible does that on purpose. It tells you these guys died because of their long hair, just so that you know you're not supposed to do it. It's a shame to you if you do it. They don't understand what it symbolizes. But, you know, when Samson had long hair, it was a shame to him. Do you understand that? He was commanded to do it. It wasn't an optional thing for him. He was required. But God tells us what it symbolizes. You know, if you read the story of Samson, it symbolizes Jesus. The long hair is a veil. Paul says her long hair is given to her as a veil. It disguises you. It hides who you are. You get it? If a woman doesn't have a fabric veil, she can use her hair. She can throw it forward. My wife has done it. It's your rudimentary veil that you can use if you don't have anything else. So Samson had a veil. I wonder what that could symbolize. You know, every hero in the Bible symbolizes Christ. Was Christ ever veiled? Did Jesus come to earth in a veil? Was Jesus disguised? Was his evil wife, the Jewish church, always trying to get him to reveal the secret of his power, just like with Samson? Did she finally realize it when she got the hair removed? She realized his true identity, and the Pharisees, the Jews, learn that he is the Son of God. They finally have their method of killing him because he's blasphemed. It's all symbolic, guys. Anyway, the hair symbolizes a veil. The hair of Samson symbolizes Christ being veiled. And I know you can hear a train out there. I live near a train. Can you hear the train? No? Yes, I'm sure you do. Sometimes I imagine the last trumpet. You're going to hear it. It's going to come. You're actually going to hear it someday. Remember that. It's good to have reminders. Ancient connection. I get it. It wasn't me. I didn't give the answer. If anybody wants to come up here, you know, I haven't seen anybody come up, but you're welcome to. Everybody's welcome to come up. Is my link working? Somebody click on it and just see if it's working. Okay, another heresy. Let's go over some because we're going to try to go over all of the major heresies of the Catholics. Remember, I said there's about 40 of them. We're just going to do a few more. It's not us guys saying that long hair isn't worthy of excommunication. That's your own church. That's the rudder saying that. Exposing corpses, another massive heresy. How long are we going to go tonight? But what a ridiculous heresy that they put the bodies of their saints, who are not all saints, some of them are wicked men, but they put them on display in boxes, in glass cases for people to see. The early church completely condemned this. This is not allowed. This is desecrating the relics of the saints. You are supposed to bury them. If you don't, it goes against the laws of nature. That's what all the church fathers teach. And yet they dare do this. And they think that they are the ones who respect the saints the most. No, they respect the saints the least, these Catholics. Many scriptures on this subject. But let's read a few. I like the one from Athanasius. Let's read this one. Athanasius actually quotes from Anthony. Anthony the Great. He says, "But when the brethren were urging him to abide with them and there to die," this is Anthony, "he suffered it not for many other reasons, as he showed by keeping silence, and especially for this reason. The Egyptians are wont to honor with funeral rites and to wrap in linen cloths at death the bodies of good men, and especially of the holy martyrs, and not to bury them underground, but to place them on couches and to keep them in their houses, thinking in this to honor the departed. And Anthony often urged the bishops to give commandment to the people on this matter. In like manner, he taught the laity and reproved the women, saying that this thing was neither lawful nor holy at all. And thus saying, he showed that he who did not bury the bodies of the dead after death transgressed the law." Now, guys, there are many quotations from the church fathers saying this. You're not allowed to put a body on display. They did this in some places, like in Egypt. He was condemned. And Anthony said, "I'm not even going to hang around here to die here in Egypt, because I know you guys have this evil custom of putting us on display. I don't want my body on display. You're not supposed to be looking at the bodies of the dead. They're supposed to be under the earth." And now the Catholics think they are holy. They are more holy because they take the bodies of their saints and not only put them on display for people to go and look at and touch and grab, but they even chop up their bodies into little bits. They chop their arms and their legs off. With John Chrysostom, they're going to chop his ear off. They're going to chop your fingers off. They're going to chop all your little bits off. Sometimes they just behead you, They'll take his head, John Chrysostom's head. Let's put it on display over here. You realize that's like the most insulting thing you could ever do to a body. If you love somebody, if you have respect for that person, you don't dismember their body. Did you know that, Orthodox? Now, I know some of this stuff is absolutely shocking to you. You never heard this before, Orthodox. But you understand, in ancient times, when you absolutely hated somebody, like this is your worst enemy ever, you would take his body, you'd hang it up somewhere, you put it on display. You wouldn't bury it. And by not allowing it to be buried, you're showing the ultimate hatred toward this person. That's what people used to understand. Now you guys think that that is a sign of respect for them. Also, you'd cut off his head. That's an important thing. You chop his head off. You wouldn't actually bury his body with his head. You'd make sure the head is one place and the body is somewhere else. Well, now the Orthodox do that. Did you guys know that at Mount Athos, they behead every single body of every single monk and priest who dies on Mount Athos? They cut their heads off. And they put it in a separate place from where the body is. And they mix up the bones too. They don't even know whose bone is whose. Let me show you. They behead them. And, here's a funny clip too. Look, it's Josiah Trenum. He's like, we have this catastrophic rise in cremation, he says. He says, it's terrible. We're cremating bodies instead of burying them. This is against the laws of nature. Idiot. Putting bodies on display is against the laws of nature. It's not just cremation, but you convict yourself, all you Orthodox who make an article or a video like this. Cremation is wrong. We need to bury the bodies. Or wait, no, don't bury the bodies either. Just actually put them on display and behead them too. They literally chop the heads out, guys. Every single monk or priest who dies on Mount Athos, his head is cut off and put on a shelf. Oh my goodness. Okay, exposing corpses. Yeah, that's a law of nature. We're supposed to bury bodies. We're supposed to put them under the earth. Then they have the Incorrupt Saints heresy, where they claim that the bodies of the saints they don't actually decompose. Look, there it is, guys. One of the Incorrupt Saints. Look at that. They didn't even decompose. Or wait a second. It is decomposed. What in the world's wrong with these people? I remember they'll be like, well, it's not completely decomposed. Okay. That's completely decomposed. Well, no, it's incorrupt. Can't you see? It's miraculous. God is miraculously preserving these bodies. That's a bunch of wax. I can see it clearly. Well, stop looking at that. Don't look at it, please. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to look at it. Sorry for exposing you. They literally, in the Catholic Church, they're more serious about this, about covering them with wax and then saying, look, it never decomposed. But the Orthodox do it too. They lie to people. I've even had friends who partially joined the Orthodox Church for this reason. And they say, they've got the miracles, Luke. They've got the miracles. I've got to join them. Now, I'm not talking about very intelligent people, just so you know. I'm not saying there's ever been somebody that we were able to sit down with and show all this evidence to, and then they rejected it. This is somebody, this was back when I was like 17. I didn't even know how to refute this. But, I'd hear my friends becoming Orthodox, and they'd say, they've got the miracles. Look, they've got the Incorrupt Saints. As if that even helps you choose between these two groups when you've got multiple groups claiming to have the Incorrupt Saints. You still have to investigate it. And neither of them truly have Incorrupt Saints. And even if you did, that would not prove that they are the true church. There's just so many problems with their way of convincing you that they are the true church. The way to know that you are part of the true church is you're preserving the original doctrines. It's not that you have a body that became a skeleton a little slower than other ones. Oh, by the way, did you guys know that the Catholics and Orthodox, they have Incorrupt Saints that they will declare incorrupt, and then after some centuries, they'll dig them up again. And when they look at them, they'll say, oh, that looks really bad. And they'll say, never mind, they're not incorrupt anymore. Did you know they actually do that? There's documented cases where they do that. They were incorrupt, but for whatever reason, they started getting corrupt. They also condemn the doctrine that was the consensus of the early church. We are aware, like Justin tells us, that there are some who do not accept the millennium because they think it sounds a little too carnal. The idea that Christ is going to reign on the earth, he's going to put all the nations under his subjection, and that all the saints are going to rule over these wicked people as their slaves even. And also the idea of marrying, which is a little bit of a complicated issue because we don't know exactly who is marrying. But in any case, this is the consensus of the early church, guys. It's found in the book of Revelation. and it's supported by the people who are closest to the Apostle John, such as Papias, who, according to some of the earliest introductions of the Gospels, there's a really ancient one where they say Papias actually wrote the Gospel at John's dictation. That's how close he was to the Apostle John. But Papias, in his writings, he completely supports the millennium reign of Christ. He does not take it to be allegorical. These things can be allegorical and literal, by the way. You can say in some sense Christ has set up his kingdom, but there's going to be an actual millennium reign of Christ. That's what the early church believed. The closest people to John, like Papias and Polycarp and Irenaeus, who was a disciple of Polycarp, and Justin Martyr, who taught in Ephesus, guys. Now, John the Apostle, when he left the island of Patmos, he went and lived in Ephesus, and that's where he delivered the book of Revelation. Justin Martyr, who's living just a few years after John's death, is the chief teacher in Ephesus. So he has the Gospel of John, and his understanding of it is, well, the church believes this. They believe there's going to be a literal millennium reign of Christ. That was what Justin Martyr taught. And he says, there are some people who don't believe this. They think it just sounds too carnal. He says, but this is the teaching of the church. It is what all of those earliest fathers taught, and it's what the consensus of them taught, meaning the majority, for many centuries afterward, although you do have a few individuals in the Ante-Nicene period, a couple, who reject it. But I will just tell you, those people like Eusebius, like Dionysius of Alexandria, when they reject it, did you know they also reject the book of Revelation? They completely reject the entire book of Revelation. And why do they do that? Because they consider the book of Revelation to be so explicit in the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Isn't that amazing? So they don't just reject the millennium, they actually reject the book of Revelation. So we do believe in the millennium reign of Christ, and the Catholics currently, Catholics and Orthodox, condemn it as a heresy. And they know this was taught by the early church. They know it was the vast majority. And they know that all the earliest church fathers and all those who were closest to John the Apostle, like Polycarp, Justin Martyr, Papias, and Irenaeus, they all taught it. And many other church fathers. Many. Huge list. And yet they condemn it as a heresy. How could you do that? How could you say the earliest consensus of the church is a heresy? They also do it on other subjects, which we admit are minor. But just remember, guys, every single doctrine connects with every single other doctrine. There's no one single doctrine that you can disconnect from the rest. And you say, well, it doesn't matter what you believe about the Nephilim. It's such a minor issue. Who cares? No, guys, because the Nephilim doctrine actually relates to other doctrines. Did you know that? The teaching that you find in Genesis 6, which all the church fathers before Nicaea upheld, and a few after Nicaea, but it completely fell off. But that doctrine, guys, relates to a few different subjects. We just mentioned veiling, that Paul says women ought to have a veil on their heads because of the angels. In other words, he's saying, have a reminder on your head. Remember, even the angels couldn't resist the women's beauty. So all the men should not be expected to resist something that even the angels couldn't resist. Now, obviously, they are going to sin. It is still their own sin. I'm not saying they're not in sin if they lust after a woman. But we have a certain principle in Christianity, in real life, of seduction. We know that people can be caused to stumble. That's why Jesus says, if anybody causes one of these little ones to stumble, it's not that, everybody's exempt just because they were caused to stumble. They're not completely excused. But God does lay it at the feet of, he does blame the person who entices more than the one who gave in to a temptation, more who gave in to seduction. So women, don't seduce men. Dress modestly. Obey the canons of the church. Obey the unanimous teaching of all the church fathers for the first centuries, and even the unanimous teaching of the entire Jewish people and the entire worldwide custom. That was also to have women veiled. And even Protestants. Well, guys, we have a massive section from the 1400s to the 1900s where Protestants even interpreted it to be a face veil. They said Paul is talking about a face veil. And a lot of them go, but we don't have to do a face veil. But they knew that's what Paul was talking about. So anyway, if you throw away this doctrine of the Nephilim and you say, actually, it's the sons of Seth, they were in love with the daughters of Cain. That's stupid. That's retarded. Let's say you have that, which, it's completely refuted in the New Testament too. Jude says that, they went after strange flesh, just like the people at Sodom and Gomorrah. He even quotes from the book of Enoch. It's just crazy. How can you reject this doctrine? It's so obvious. But the post-Nicene church calls this a blasphemy. John Chrysostom calls this one of the worst blasphemies, to say that angels came down in human form. And Augustine says similar things. But for some reason, John Chrysostom is the worst. But now across the board, they say this is a heresy. How can you do that? How can you dare do such a thing? This connects to modesty. It connects to the incarnation of Christ, because it shows that even the angels could not live righteously as human beings. God had to come down in human form. And it does connect to a lot of other doctrines. Just don't think that anything can be isolated. All of the things in Scripture are meant to be taken together. You cannot just throw out a doctrine, condemn it. It's also connected to the resurrection, because these people who say, well, angels, like it is important to understand that angels are not female. Like that's an important thing to understand. It's important to know just in general what angels are capable of doing, because these people, I don't know, there's too much to say about it, but it connects to what Jesus says, that in the resurrection they're like the angels. Because so there are some blasphemous things that the Catholics say. They don't want to believe this doctrine, but it's too much to get into right now. They have one of the worst heresies, the binding and loosing heresy. So in Scripture, Jesus says, whatever you bind on earth has been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth has been loosed in heaven. And then he says in John, he clarifies, he says, whoever sins you forgive on earth, they're forgiven in heaven. So he explains, he clarifies what binding and loosing is. It is forgiving somebody's sins. And the church fathers, like, go read apostolic constitutions. It's so explicit. But we have a whole section on this topic. And all the church fathers are unanimous. And Nolan, again, just made an excellent 4-hour video on divorce and remarriage. And this topic had to be brought up because the Catholics teach this lie. Well, we are allowed to let people commit the worst sins, the most heinous sins, like divorce and remarriage, which is adultery, or going to war, which is murder, or any other thing. They say we can change anything. In fact, they've extended this not only to forgiving people's sins in an unlawful way, we're going to get into that, but even just saying we can change any doctrine of the church at will. They say that's binding and loosing. We can just change doctrines whenever we feel like it. Guys, that is not the meaning of binding and loosing. Binding and loosing is very specific. It's talking about when a person has committed a sin, they come to the bishop. The bishop decides whether it's severe enough that they're going to be excommunicated. And he excommunicates them if it is a sin unto death. If it's a sin like adultery, murder, idolatry, blasphemy, denying Christ, these things you're automatically cut off from Christ. You're cut off from communion. And it'll be years before you're restored. So the bishops have this authority to cut people off from communion, which is to cut them off from salvation. So if a priest then were to say to somebody, it's fine, it's okay if you deny Christ, I'm just going to give you communion. Like the church fathers say, it is to no purpose that he binds or looses. It's his responsibility to make sure this person has done deeds appropriate to repentance that prove he is truly repentant, which takes years. He can't just be, you can't just trick God. You can't just say, well, God, I'm going to abrogate my duty. I'm just going to give him the Eucharist and it's going to be okay. I'm just going to declare that it's not a sin. I'm going to bless his third marriage. I'm going to call that marriage, not adultery. And I think God's just going to tolerate it because, binding and loosing. I've got the binding and loosing. You can't trick God. That priest is now sharing in that person's sins because you are required to cut that person off from communion because they're not approved by God. You can't just tell God to approve that person. He's not going to do it. So this is a massive heresy, the idea that you can just declare something that is a sin to not be a sin at all. That is not what binding and loosing is about. Binding and loosing is the authority to cut someone off from communion and then to restore them after they've shown that they are repentant. The Catholics have completely perverted that. And now they're letting people practice sin, and they're just saying it's not sin at all. And they've extended binding and loosing to mean you can remove entire doctrines of the church. You can do a complete reversal on something that the church taught from the beginning on all kinds of issues. That is a massive heresy. They're binding and loosing nonsense. Their church invincibility doctrine is too long to get into right now, but the church believed you could be saved and that you not only could leave an apostate church, but that you had to leave an apostate church in order to be saved. There's much to say about that. Too much to get into because we've already been going for 2 hours and 23 minutes. In the Orthodox Church, meaning Catholics and Orthodox, they love their fancy clothes. They are lovers of gold, lovers of riches. They have pastor salaries now, which we've briefly talked about. That was completely forbidden in the church. We have a whole article where all the church fathers say no bishop is allowed to have a salary. If you become a bishop, you have renounced money. You don't have anything to do with money anymore. The only time you even touch money is just when you're distributing it to the poor. It's when you're taking care of other people that are needy. But you yourself, if you're a bishop, you are supported by the church. You're supported by the congregation who gets you your food, pays your bills, but you are not actually handling money. You're not going out and buying stuff. You're not buying a house or anything. You are completely taken care of. You are in the hands of other people. You're almost like an old person in a nursing home. You can't do what you want with money. You've renounced money. You've renounced business. This is the requirements of the church. It's in the earliest canons that you cannot be involved in the affairs of the world or in business of any kind. And yet these Catholics just take it for granted. Oh yeah, I'm the big businessman of our church. In fact, we got a store. You see the website we were just looking at? We got a store. We sell books. We sell icons. We sell candles. We're selling all kinds of stuff. We got the big fund to build the new building. We're making money left and right, hand over fist. It's a business now. Give it 3 to 5 business days to process your transaction. That's what they're saying on their websites. They are heavily involved in business. That is a complete perversion of what the church required. They also practice usury. There's no prohibition on usury. They also practice lawsuits. The church used to excommunicate you if you took someone to law. They also have a heresy. Again, this is the consensus of the early church, that when the souls of the saints, when they depart out of a body at death, that soul goes down. It doesn't go up. It goes down into Hades, into a place called paradise. And you wait for the resurrection in paradise. They teach now that your soul goes straight to heaven even before the resurrection. That's a heresy. In fact, why don't we read a couple quotations there? This is mind-boggling to the Catholics, that their understanding of heaven is a new teaching. It's almost a post-Nicene teaching. But for some reason, after Nicaea, it's crazy, guys. This doctrine just disappears. It's gone after Nicaea. It's almost like collectively the whole church has done a complete about-face, even though the early church fathers are adamant about this. The souls of the saints are down in Hades right now, in the place of the dead, waiting for the resurrection. And they cannot go to heaven until the resurrection. And that they have to follow the law of the dead. They have to follow the example of Christ. Christ did not ascend to heaven until the resurrection. His soul waited in Hades. And then at the resurrection, then he ascends. Remember, he says, "Stop clinging to me, Mary. I have not yet ascended to my Father." He had not gone to heaven yet. And they make up all this fakery. They say, well, after Jesus' resurrection, now all the souls go straight to heaven. No, not according to the early church. They say all the apostles are still waiting down there. Here's Irenaeus. I'll read you a couple ones. Irenaeus, this is a long quotation. We've got a lot from Tertullian and Hippolytus, and we've got a lot here. It's going to be too long to read, but I'll read it anyway. I'm going to read. It's good. You're going to enjoy it. Here we go. Irenaeus says, "Since again, some who are reckoned among the orthodox go beyond the prearranged plan for the exaltation of the just and are ignorant of the methods by which they are disciplined beforehand for incorruption, they thus entertain heretical opinions. For the heretics, despising the handiwork of God and not admitting the salvation of their flesh," he's talking about Gnostics, "while they also treat the promises of God contemptuously and pass beyond God altogether in the sentiments they form, they affirm that immediately upon their death they shall pass above the heavens and the demiurge, and go to the mother, Mary." And that's really what he's talking about. It's prophecy of what the Catholics will teach. They go to their mother or to that father whom they have feigned. He says, "But the case was that for 3 days Jesus dwelt in the place where the dead were, as the prophet says concerning him. And the Lord remembered his dead saints who slept formerly in the land of sepulchre, and he descended to them to rescue and save them. And the Lord himself says, as Jonah remained 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth. Then also the apostle says, but when he ascended, what is it but that he also descended into the lower parts of the earth? This too David says, when prophesying of him, and you have delivered my soul from the nethermost hell. And on his rising again the 3rd day, he said to Mary, who was the first to see him and to worship him, do not touch me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. If then the Lord observed the law of the dead, that he might become the first begotten from the dead, and tarried until the 3rd day in the lower parts of the earth, then afterwards rising in the flesh, so that he even showed the print of the nails to his disciples, he thus ascended to the Father. If all these things occurred, I say, how must these men not be put to confusion, these Catholics, who allege that The lower parts refer to this world, so that was a teaching of the Gnostics, but he's about to refute what they say, because the Catholics believe your soul goes straight to heaven before the resurrection. This is a Gnostic teaching. It's a Gnostic heresy that you get to go to heaven before the resurrection. He says, "For as the Lord went away in the midst of the shadow of death, where the souls of the dead were, yet afterwards arose in the body, and after the resurrection was taken up, it is manifest that the souls of his disciples also, upon whose account the Lord underwent these things, shall go away into the invisible places allotted to them by God." So he's saying God's disciples, Jesus' disciples, are going to go down in that place underneath the earth, not into heaven. Not yet. They got to wait. They'll go into that invisible place allotted to them by God, and there remain until the resurrection, awaiting that event, then receiving their bodies and rising in their entirety, that is, bodily, just as the Lord arose. They shall come thus into the presence of God. For no disciple is above the master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master. For our master, or as our master, therefore, did not at once depart, taking flight to heaven, but awaited the time of his resurrection, prescribed by the Father, which had been also shown forth through Jonah, and rising again after 3 days was taken up to heaven, so ought we also to await the time of our resurrection, prescribed by God and foretold by the prophets, and so rising be taken up, as many as the Lord shall account worthy of this privilege. So it's very explicit, guys. There is no immediate departure to heaven. That's what the early church taught. Catholics teach something different. Now, again, this isn't a new doctrine. This is something that even right after Nicaea, and even one person that we can find before Nicaea, one of the Latin fathers, teaches that, the soul goes directly to heaven. There is no waiting in Hades. Now, you might not think this is an important thing, but I'll bet if you're Catholic or Orthodox, you can already sense why this is an important doctrine. Because your church teaches that all the souls of the saints are in heaven right now, and that they've already undergone their deification. But that has not happened. They're waiting underneath the earth. In fact, in Revelation, it says, the souls of the martyrs are crying out to God from underneath the altar. And they're saying, "How long, O Lord, until you avenge us?" What is the altar? Let me show you. He says, this is Victorinus' commentary on Revelation. "And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain." He relates that he saw under the altar of God, that is, under the earth, the souls of them that were slain. See, all the church fathers say that altar in Revelation is the earth. And it's not that hard to figure out because, again, they were slain on the altar, which is the earth. Get it? You're killed. Where were you killed? On the earth. So now you're underneath it. Even if the altar were heaven, which is nonsense, it still says underneath it. So it's not in heaven. No matter how you cut it, guys, that is completely absurd to suggest the souls of the martyrs are in heaven. And by the way, this is a proof for you that in Revelation, it's quite explicit. It's proof that just because Jesus died and he ascended to heaven, it's proof that, contrary to what they say, that doesn't mean all the souls are now also going to heaven. They wouldn't even be following Jesus' example if they did, because Jesus only went to heaven after the resurrection. I've heard some people try to use that verse where in Matthew it says that the rocks were split and the tombs were opened and many were resurrected and came out and showed themselves in Jerusalem. They'll say, this is talking about the resurrection. So then those guys went to heaven. No, they didn't go to heaven either. No church father teaches that. Those people died afterward. They died a natural death, and they were not deified. You understand, if they were deified, they'd be shining as bright as the sun. They'd be walking in the city as bright as the sun. I mean, that would be absolutely crazy. No, that's not what people saw. They were resurrected just like Lazarus was, and Lazarus lived to old age. A second time he died, and that's what those people did too. I'll just read one more from Justin because we don't have enough time. Justin Martyr says, "You may have fallen in with some Gnostics who are called Christians. However, they do not admit this." So he's talking to Trypho about that souls have to wait until the resurrection to be taken to heaven. He says, "You may have fallen in with some Gnostics who are called Christians. However, they do not admit the intermediate state. And they venture to blaspheme the God of Abraham. They say there is no resurrection of the dead. Rather, they say that when they die, their souls are taken to heaven. Do not imagine that they are Christians." Now, I know what the Orthodox and Catholics are going to say. They're going to say, "Oh, come on, Luke. These people are heretics. They're not Christians, these Gnostics, for completely different reasons than that reason. I mean, they don't even believe in God. They believe that the God of the Old Testament is an evil, separate God. They don't even believe in the Trinity." Yes, I know that. Justin knows that. But when Justin is enumerating the reasons why these people are not Christians, he includes this reason as one of the reasons. He says this is a heresy. They are saying that the souls are taken directly to heaven when they die. That's one of the reasons they're heretics. He says, don't imagine that they are Christians. So I'm sorry, Cathodox, you have been taught a heresy. This is a heresy, and it has massive consequences. It's what leads you guys to saying things like, Mary is Queen of Heaven. Mary is not in heaven, guys. That's just fundamentally false. She can't be Queen of Heaven if she's not in heaven. There are many more church fathers teaching this. Hippolytus has a wonderful book where he just talks all about the afterlife. He goes into great detail. He says every single soul of the saint, of all the saints, including the martyrs, just like it says in Revelation, are all waiting underneath the earth. They're not in heaven. Let's read one more or a few more heresies. We definitely got to be going soon, but we're going to try to knock out a few more. These are the reasons we are not with the Catholics or the Orthodox. So this heresy of souls going directly to heaven, the early church taught that is a heresy. They said, literally, they said the words, if anybody believes this, do not imagine that they are Christians. Okay, early church fathers, I'm not going to imagine that the Catholics and Orthodox are Christians. They also have a perverted idea of the resurrection. Again, this is shocking. What happened, guys? What happened? I mean, how did the church forget such basic things? That in the resurrection, you're not going to have genitals anymore. I don't want to be explicit, but the early church always taught that. You're not going to have genitals. You're not going to have the distinction between male and female in the resurrection. You're going to have a new body that's perfected. That shouldn't be so shocking to you. Don't you know that if you died as a little child in the resurrection, you're not going to be a little child anymore. You're going to be an adult. And if you had some horrible deformity or strange physical abnormality, in the resurrection, you're not going to look like that. If you have anything wrong with you, any deformities or anything, you're not going to have that in the resurrection. You're going to be a completely perfected body, something even better than what you have. Now, obviously, it's going to be your body, but it's going to be transformed. It's going to be changed. It's not going to be exactly the same. Like Paul says, we will all be changed. And he says, this mortal must put on the immortal. And he says there are different glories. There's the glory of the sun and the moon and the stars. And he says that's what you're going to have. You're going to have a glorified body. It's not going to have genitals anymore. It's not going to have breasts or a womb or any of that stuff. All kinds of stuff are going to be gone that you once had. You're not going to have like digestion anymore. Okay. I don't want to be explicit or sound like I'm doing coarse jesting or anything, but guys, like, you're not going to pass gas. You're not going to do things that you used to do with this body. This is a fallen body. Adam and Eve weren't doing that in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve's bodies, when they ate food, they're absorbing it, and there is no defecation or urination or any of that stuff. The body's changed after the fall. This is the teaching of the church fathers. Sorry if that's so shocking to you. It shouldn't be shocking to you. Seriously, if there are any Cathodocs watching this right now, they're like, that's really shocking. That's really strange. Are you saying the original body that God made is bad? No, because Adam and Eve's bodies were not like our bodies. They were changed. That's what the church fathers teach. You guys have the most crazy, mystical-minded ascetics in your religion who teach some absolutely bizarre stuff, really crazy stuff. This is like the least crazy thing ever. And by the way, the ascetics in your church, in the Orthodox Church, taught this, that there's no more female bodies in heaven. So we're not crazy to say that. But you know what it leads to, right? Not only is Mary not Queen of Heaven because she's not in heaven, Mary's not Queen of Heaven because she's not female, guys. And all the church fathers, even if they don't mention the fact that in the resurrection you're not going to have those body parts anymore, that it's just male by default, because God is male and the Son is male and the Holy Spirit is male and all the angels are male. Male is the default. Woman was taken out of man to be his helper in bearing children. But in the resurrection, there's not going to be marriage anymore. Jesus is very clear about that. So there's not going to be any bearing children. There's going to be no need for those body parts or any of those functions. It's probably too much to teach you guys. It's probably too much for you to handle. But anyway, we've got a whole section on the website about it where the church fathers teach it. And not just in the early centuries, but even going on many centuries later. That was the teaching. And one of the first people, as usual, to contradict it is Augustine. And Augustine even says, I know that there are people that teach this, that there are no female bodies in the resurrection. He goes, but, and he gives the stupid reason. It's too much to even talk about. Right? Look at this, 2 hours and 40 minutes. It's just too stupid. I'm gonna have to go to bed soon. It's already 11:30. It's almost midnight. Too stupid. Augustine completely contradicts himself. So this is a real perversion. See, in the Orthodox Church, they don't practice the holy kiss. The holy kiss is a sign of affection. It's also called the kiss of peace. You give it to someone as a quick way of assuring them that you are at peace with them. And we're supposed to be at peace before we have communion together. Nobody's allowed to bear a grudge and then have Eucharist with somebody. You're supposed to let go of all those things and resolve your conflicts beforehand. Now, that would be a lot of work, especially if you had some conflict during the week and maybe you didn't talk about it, but you all show up on Sunday to have communion together. And maybe you're sitting there going, man, do I need to have this big conversation with this person? And no, you don't need to have a huge conversation. In the early church, what you would do to assure the other person that you're at peace with them and the way they would assure you is you'd have the kiss. And by the way, it's on the lips. Yeah, I know. Nobody in the Catholic or Orthodox Church loves each other enough to give each other a kiss on the lips. But they'd give each other a kiss on the lips and they didn't think it was disgusting. But now what does the Catholic and Orthodox Church do? There's a great perversion in their church, guys. They now no longer not require people to kiss each other on the lips like they used to be required to, but they do require you to kiss lifeless images. And they call those images the image of God. So human beings, living, breathing people made in God's image, they do not require you to show affection to, but they do require you to show affection to a lifeless block of wood. That is a great perversion. God hates that. The early church also taught purgatory. They didn't teach it the same as the Catholics, but they did teach it. And the Orthodox, they just get to invent all their own new stuff. They get to invent all their afterlife stuff that completely contradicts the early church. They also went along with Augustine when he added things like marriage as a sacrament. The early church didn't teach that marriage is a sacrament. The early church is really explicit that there are only two sacraments. And if the Catholics and Orthodox say it's okay to have a marriage as a sacrament, Augustine taught it, and he was a real innovator. He was ahead of his time. I'll just have you guys know, Augustine also thought a bunch of other things were sacraments that the Catholics and Orthodox currently do not consider sacraments, such as foot washing. He said that's a sacrament. He said the kiss of peace is a sacrament. And he said making the sign of the cross is a sacrament. That's complete nonsense. Those things are not sacraments. The church taught there are two sacraments, which are symbolized by a woman's two breasts. Women don't have 3 breasts or 7 breasts or 10 breasts. Okay, sorry. Those are not sacraments, and it's a perversion. It's a dangerous perversion to say it too, because you end up getting in. It leads to their heresies that they teach now, where they say, "Well, you can get remarried because your first marriage wasn't a real one. It wasn't a sacramental marriage. If the priest does it though, then it becomes an official marriage. So you can go ahead and get divorced and remarried. And in fact, the power to make a marriage official is completely in the priest's hands. So we can even undo it using the power vested in us." No, that's false. A marriage is official even without a priest. That's what the church taught. But now they say and it's so sick, guys. They will say if you marry as a virgin, like I've been told by the Orthodox that my marriage with my wife, we were both virgins, it's fornication. I'm a fornicator. But people who get a second and third marriage, as long as it's blessed by a priest, that's holy. That's holy marriage, because they think it's a sacrament that only a priest can do. See how perverted that is? And it completely contradicts Scripture. It completely contradicts the early church fathers. Paul says, if a woman is married to an unbeliever, if she becomes a Christian and her husband remains a pagan, he says she must not leave her husband. And he says if she does leave her husband, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. So Paul considers a marriage to a pagan to be a completely legitimate marriage that she is required to stay in. She cannot go get remarried. She can't say, well, it's not a real marriage because it was a pagan wedding. She can't say that. Hopefully I was muted. I had to burp. It's a lot of gas. Sorry, I'm a gassy man. They also destroyed church offices. This is in the category of destroying church order. But not only did they, think about this, guys. They have made the emperor higher than a bishop. In the post-Nicene church, they said bishops now have the authority to choose who the bishops are going to be, especially over the patriarchates like Constantinople and Rome and all that. That's an extreme perversion. It's total destruction of apostolic succession, as far as we can see, because the canons themselves forbade it. They said if anybody Like, you go read it. Second Council of Nicaea is aware of this canon and they uphold it, but they redefine it and they say, well, really, what the original canons were about, it's only saying if you're chosen by a secular authority, then your ordination is null and void. But as long as he's a Christian, then if he's a Christian emperor, his appointment of you, then it is legitimate. Well, that's nonsense too. Even by their own standard, that doesn't work, because Constantine chose people as bishops, and his son Constantius did, and other emperors after him chose people, and they were not Christians. Remember, guys, Constantine wasn't baptized until his deathbed, and then he was baptized as an Arian by Arians. So even then, they would have to say all those ordinations, all those appointments were null and void, according to their own standard. So not only are they destroying the church's hierarchy by creating essentially a pope, but they also have destroyed other offices. Like, this is really serious, guys. They will say, and again, guys, we're not Protestants. We abhor Protestantism, but they will accuse Protestants hypocritically, and they'll say, you guys don't have real bishops, you don't have real clergy, you don't have real apostolic succession. But then they themselves come from a line of annihilated apostolic succession, where the emperors are totally interfering in all ordinations and are choosing who the bishops are going to be, who the patriarchs are going to be, even against all the canons, even when the bishops, like at Constantinople, are saying, this breaks every canon, we can't recognize this ordination as legit. And then they just end up being strong-armed into doing it. So these ordinations are null and void. This is destruction of apostolic succession. This is a papacy. It's such hypocrisy for the Orthodox to say, one of the big heresies of these Catholics is that they've got a pope, but then they've got something essentially identical to the papacy, because the emperor is choosing who is going to be bishop in the entire land. And he can depose anybody at will. Boom, you're deposed. Athanasius, you're deposed. John Chrysostom, you're opposed. Deposed, I mean. Nonsense. An emperor cannot depose somebody, and they never should have gone along with it. And we love Athanasius. He was brave in a lot of ways. But read the letters of Athanasius speaking to Constantius, the son of Constantine. He's just like, oh, Constantius, I know that you've always been a very pious and righteous man from your youth. You have always been a Christian from your youth. And you, our most God-loving emperor, have mercy on me. It's just so pathetic. Okay, may God have mercy on him. May God save Athanasius. I'm a sinner myself, and Athanasius is superior to me in almost every way I could think of. But my goodness, that groveling is what led to the church's downfall. You don't grovel to somebody. And no, Constantius was not a Christian from his youth, and Athanasius knew that. He knew this man was not baptized. He got baptized on his deathbed, just like his dad Constantine did. So it's a lie. It's a lie to say, I know you've been a Christian from your youth. It's not true. Don't say that. And it's recorded in letters that they did that. They all groveled to these emperors. It's just such corruption. But here's another one. They say things like, you guys are destroying the church's order. You're destroying, the proper order of the church with our bishops and presbyters and deacons. But then they add essentially a big pope, a big super bishop called the emperor, who can appoint and depose bishops at will. And then they also remove the office of deaconess. Now, guys, the church fathers say the office of deaconess is essential in the church. They say it's essential. It cannot be disposed of. The church fathers say Paul the apostle explicitly gave this office and details it in his letter to Titus and Timothy. When he's talking about deacons, likewise, they must be men of dignity. Men or women must likewise be dignified, not malicious gossips. If you think he's just randomly saying, I just want to talk about women right now. We were talking about deacons, but right now I just want to talk about women. Now women in general, they should be dignified. No, Paul is not suddenly changing the subject. He is talking about the qualifications of deaconesses. Right after he talks about the qualifications of male deacons, he's talking about female deacons here. That's why he continues, deacons must be husbands of only one wife. It's all in the context of deacons, but the whole church agreed with that. We've got Clement of Alexandria, Tertullian. Then we've got Ordinances of the Apostles, which is the most detailed explanation of all the ordination and the purpose, the functions of deacons. And they say it is essential. Apostolic Constitution says it's completely essential. You must have deaconesses. They perform all of the necessary things that men cannot do for the sake of decency, such as anointing, touching women, which has to be done at certain times, or ministering to sick women, or all kinds of things, visiting women. Women need to be able to visit other women to avoid scandal. But now in the Catholic and Orthodox Church, you've destroyed this office, and now you have more indecency and immodesty and shamelessness in your church because you got rid of this essential function, this essential office that God invented. And you can see the whole post-Nicene church is all talking about it. Council of Nicaea talks about deaconesses, Council of Chalcedon, Gregory of Nyssa, Basil the Great, Epiphanius, John Chrysostom, of course, Palladius, Theodoret, Sosman. And these are just some of the ones we collected. There are many, many more, but this is just what we've got so far. But then they decide to abolish it. And what do they say? This is the Council of Orleans in 553. Women who have so far received the ordination of the diaconate against the prohibitions of the canons, if it can be proved that they have returned to matrimony, should be banned from communion. But if they have given up, oh yeah, so they're just talking about deacons. So they talk about some badly behaved deaconesses. That's what leads to this next part, this canon, where they're just going to say, we're just going to abolish the office of deaconess completely. It has pleased us to decree from now on the diaconal ordination. The diaconal ordination should not be given to any woman because of the weakness of her female nature. So they say the women, they cause trouble. We're going to abolish an office of the church. Can you believe it? And now in the Catholic and Orthodox Church, they have abolished deaconesses. Unbelievable. So really, from the top to the bottom, they have destroyed the offices of the church. They add new offices when they want, like monk. Monk? How is monk an office of the church? But they added that. And they say, we're going to add a new one called, super mega bishop, pope, super mega not pope, called the emperor. And they're going to say, he's the only one who has the authority to convene a council. Right. Just like the apostles said, right? No, he has nothing to do with the church. The church said you can't even be a Christian. You can't even be a catechumen if you're still an emperor. You can't be a soldier. You can't be a ruler of a city if you want to become a catechumen. And the church compromised on that after Nicaea because they had such a friendly emperor and they started pretending he's a Christian, like Athanasius. Calling him, I know you've been a most pious Christian. You're not even baptized. Are you really going to compromise on the most basic doctrine of the faith? You're not a Christian until you're baptized. And in reality, Constantine was far from a Christian, guys. I love Constantine. I grew up loving Constantine. My dad taught me to revere him. I read the Church Fathers. I had him, the stories of Constantine and the big cross in the sky. I had all of it read to me since I was a kid, and I loved him. But then as I got older, I read the Church Fathers. I was so disappointed because I could see this man is not a Christian. This man is using the church. He is playing games. He is doing what is expedient for his own empire. And read the historians too, like Sosman and Socrates, and don't read Eusebius because he's so biased, but read Rufinus and the rest. And they talk about Constantine still being a pagan. He's still got images of the gods, and he still adorns his palace with them, it says. He was not a Christian, and he was a persecutor of the church. So anyway, yeah, they're adding that office. Okay, now here's one of the most disgusting things. Do you want to know what's connected with this deaconess nonsense? So this is the hypocrisy of the church. They say, no more deaconesses because of the weakness of the female nature. They just can't be trusted. They are unstable. They're just too weak. They're women. Okay. And then what does that church turn around and do? They go and they let a woman, a consort, that's a nice way of saying prostitute, a woman named Irene, power-hungry, prostitute, murderous woman named Irene, who killed her own son just because she didn't want him to be emperor. She killed Constantine VI, put out his eyes and let him bleed out her own son because she did not want him to be emperor. And she is the one who convened the Second Council of Nicaea. She is the one who single-handedly reinforced icon worship after it had been banned by a council before, which was a much larger council. You see, she knew the current patriarch of Constantinople was completely against image worship and had even written many books on it. She went to go visit him after her husband died. She became the ruler. She was the regent. That just means she's the acting ruler of the empire while her son is still a boy. So she goes and visits the bishop of Constantinople named Paul, I think Paul the Fourth. And she's like, so what is it? By the way, we don't know what happened in this conversation. We just know Paul was vehemently against icon veneration. She visited him, and we can imagine what she said. So what's it going to be? Now, this woman was absolutely bloodthirsty. And he's like, you can do what you want. And she's like, I'm going to choose a new bishop. She goes back to Constantinople. She chooses her imperial secretary, Teresios, to be the bishop of Constantinople. And once again, we've got these guys who are not even baptized. And she says, you're going to be emperor. You're going to be like the biggest bishop in the entire land. And go ahead and convene this council right now. We're going to reinstate icon veneration. There was only one patriarch, at this stupid council, Second Council of Nicaea. And this woman is the one who reinstated image worship. Then, by the way, it was banned again a few years later in 815 at another council in Constantinople. They reversed it. They said, man, that was a joke, wasn't it? That stupid council made by that stupid woman. They once again reversed it. And then a few years later, another woman, another empress, got them to do it again. Got them to go back to icon veneration. And still half the church opposed it. This is such a corrupt time, guys. You know, I'm not saying anybody in this whole case is a good guy. But the church believes it took a woman, you know, a woman to be emperor, to exercise all her authority, to disregard all the other bishops, and to just make a patriarch of Constantinople, make a bishop out of it. I'm going to fashion you with my own authority and my power. You are going to be the bishop of Constantinople. Now, do what I say. Tell them that we're going to worship the images. Did I mention she's a prostitute? She was just a prostitute. She was a really ambitious prostitute, but you can look it up. She was a prostitute. She was one of the lovers, one of her consorts of the emperor. So anyway, this crazy prostitute, she kills her own son. She's a murderer. And they say, oh, Empress Saint Irene, yes, you are the one who chooses bishops. Only through your power and your wisdom can we have icon veneration. Without you, how could we have it? Oh. But anyway, no deaconesses, who actually have no authority in the church, because they're just too unreliable. They are just too unstable. They are just not wise. Just the weakness of their female nature prevents them from even being a servant in the church, let alone a leader. But anyway, Empress Irene, now we want you to rule over us. Thank you for making me Patriarch of Constantinople, Irene. Thank you. You're in charge of me. You run the church. You're in charge. Do you see a contradiction here? There's a bit of a contradiction. No deaconesses, but you can have empresses, like super mega popes. I see a bit of a contradiction. Let's go back to the last ones. Okay, what's the last one? So deaconesses, huge contradiction. You know, it's the deaconess thing is bad enough by itself, but the fact that they contradict themselves by saying we're going to have uber bishops, you know, emperors or empresses over the church is just complete nonsense. This is such a corruption of God's order. Guys, God designed the church to be such a tightly run ship. It's not supposed to have this craziness. Emperors, secular authorities intervening, totally unlawful ordinations, women running the church. But that's what your post-Nicene church looks like. It's a joke. And then the superstition that they engage in, the holy water, the amulets. Amulets. They really believe that. I cannot believe it. That's just, we're going to have a whole section on the website. We haven't made it yet, but we're collecting the church fathers. Just do a word search. Every church father you can find, and by the way, every council you can find, talking about amulets, you will never find them saying one nice thing about it. They will say, this is superstitious. Christians do not have amulets. We do not have little necklaces and keepsakes and things that we believe ward off demons and things. But eventually the church allowed it and started endorsing it, and now the church believes in all that hocus pocus nonsense, which has nothing to do with this Christian religion. And hesychasm, the nonsense that they got from Eastern religions, which we got from that idiot Gregory Palamas. How can you call a guy in the 1300s a church father? But anyway, that was a massive controversy, and rightly so. But the church was too weak to properly refute it. And then vain repetition of prayer. I mean, of all their heresies, like this has got to be one of the least damning. I mean, everything else is just so over the top wicked. But yes, they also engage in repetition, vain repetition of prayer, because they have no idea how to pray. You go and you listen to these liturgies, just bring some earplugs or something. You just, Lord have mercy, 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 Lord have mercy. And they even say it as fast as they can. It's not even in a very dignified or respectful way. You know, if you're going to pray, Lord, have mercy on me, you don't say it like that. Okay? It doesn't mean anything to God if you sit there saying, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. That's how fast they do it. I'm not kidding. They do it that fast. I remember when my friend, when he became Orthodox, I'd go over to his house and he'd be standing in front of his prayer corner and he'd be reading his little book, Lord have mercy, 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 because it gives you a number, say it, 20 times or whatever. What a joke. Because people do not know what prayer is. They don't know what worship is. They don't know what the church's order is. They don't know what liturgy is supposed to be. They don't know what ordination is. They don't know what veneration is, or loving your neighbor. They don't know what modesty is. They don't know what a doctrine is. Like, well, it's not a dogmatic doctrine. 2,000 years later, and we still don't have, an official teaching on that subject. When are you going to have an official teaching? Isn't that the whole purpose? I can go to the church and I can have everything laid out and set in stone. No, it is set in stone. In reality, they just have chiseled it out. They've tried to reverse it. I have news for you, Orthodox. You can never reverse the church's teachings. It's impossible. They're permanent. That's why we're not budging on this. That's why we're not with you. It's why we're going to expose you, Orthodox. It's why we're going to come after you. We're going to be the biggest thorn in your side that you ever had. More than the Protestants. Protestants cannot really expose you. Protestants are hypocrites. Protestants are weak. They're uneducated. They're unsubmissive. But the people who are truly submissive to Christ's church, who obey their mother, are going to be the ones to destroy you, Orthodox. And it's not there's going to be, 10 million people leaving to join God's true church, but there are going to be a lot of people who realize this church is wrong to refer to the church fathers. If we accomplish anything, it will be, we hope that we will get people to leave this wicked church, stop being idolaters, and be saved by God. And another one is that we hope that this church, if we are successful, we hope that this church, the Catholics and Orthodox, these harlot sisters, will stop referring to the church fathers. Will stop claiming the church fathers agree with them. If we're successful, when you hear the phrase church fathers, when you hear that, you'll no longer think of the Catholics or Orthodox. And something new will pop in people's minds after some years. And they'll hear church fathers and they'll go, oh, you mean all the guys who condemn the Catholics and Orthodox? Oh, yeah. Catholics and Orthodox hate the church fathers. If we're successful, that's what we'll accomplish. But we want the salvation of souls, and that requires repentance. Repentance from this nonsense. Worshiping images, thinking that God is worshipped through images, offering God types of prayer through incense, thinking you can manipulate God that way, offering him some incense. You might as well go back to doing animal sacrifices. That's what the church teaches. Murder, adultery, simony, that stupid Coloridian heresy of offering bread loaves in Mary's name, worshiping images of emperors, which is the one thing that they required you to do to deny Christ. Now you practice it everywhere, Catholics and Orthodox. Now you do it in your homes. Now you do it in church. I even saw it happen when I visited a priest. He goes, when I offer incense to that image of Constantine, yeah, they're doing it. At one time, you were excommunicated from the church if you bow down to and offer incense to the image of the emperor. Now it's normal. Now it's normalized. And they're like, well, he's a Christian. Well, never mind. He wasn't a Christian until his deathbed. And then he got baptized by an Arian and was an Arian himself and a persecutor of the church who had exiled Christians. And that's your Saint Constantine, equal to the apostles. Did the apostles persecute the church? I rest my case. Anyway, evolution, they allow evolution. Half of them teach evolution, false ordinations, showing off prostitute women, encouraging prostitution. I know that they do it in ignorance, but guys, it doesn't change the fact a lot of the worst sins are committed in ignorance, such as abortion. So they are dressed like prostitutes. May God have mercy on them, and may they repent of it. That's why we're speaking to them. We want them to repent of it. Neglect of children. Oh, I didn't even go over that. I mean, how wicked is it that they send their children off to public school? Why do they not teach as an official doctrine that women must stay at home, like Paul says, like the whole church taught? Women are not allowed to have careers outside of the home. They must be at home taking care of the children. The church taught that dogmatically. But they don't require it. Women can do what they want. They can work outside of the home. They can have work husbands. You ever heard work husbands? Again, this contributes to adultery. Letting your children go to these public schools results in the destruction of their souls as they're taught evolution and homosexuality and birth control and fornication and drugs and every other disgusting, perverted thing on the planet at these public schools. No parent can claim to love their children if they send them to public schools, and no priest can claim to love his congregation if he lets them do this to their children. We've got the effeminacy in their church, the long hair, the fancy dresses, the embroidered clothes. And in the Catholic Church, they're effeminate in another way. They don't do long hair, but they shave the beard because they're gay. Exposing corpses, desecrating relics. They all do that in the Catholic and Orthodox Church. Their ridiculous Incorrupt Saints heresy, where they say the bodies of the saints don't actually decompose. The early church completely refutes that. I mean, your own eyes refute that, don't they? But the early church says God doesn't even want the bodies of the saints to continue. They condemn the Millennium doctrine, which was the consensus of the early church. They condemn the doctrine about the Nephilim. being the sons of the angels, they condemn that as a heresy. I mean, wicked, absolutely disgusting stuff. But yeah, they officially, guys, the Millennium Doctrine, they say that is a heresy. You can't be a Christian if you believe that. That's what they say. And many others, many other heresies that we've gone over tonight. We cannot be with a church that is murderous, adulterous, idolatrous, blasphemous, and practices simony and Judaizing. Can't. I mean, any one of those would exclude them from the church in ancient times. But it's all of them. You know why it's all of them? It's so that you can have no doubt that they are apostates. The longer you go and look into any of these things in their church, the longer you study their church and compare it to the early church, the more heresies you're going to find. We find new ones all the time, but we don't bore you with the minor things. These are the biggest ones. These are the ones that stick out. These are the ones that stick out to anybody with their eyes open. Are your eyes open? Are you going to go look up what idolatry is? I mean, it is so simple. Go look up what God forbade. Bowing and serving. Go find out. Does your church do that? And find out what the church says. Do they make exceptions? Well, as long as it's an image of Jesus, then you can worship God through these images. Go look it up. Why don't we have a call? Why don't we have a debate? Catholics, Orthodox, you're invited. I think that'll be the end of the live stream. I hope you guys were edified by it. We laid it out for you. You know, everybody wants us to lay it out. Why aren't you with the Catholics? Why aren't you with the Orthodox? Give us the reasons. There you go. 3 hours. We gave you the reasons. Wish we could have had even one Catholic or Orthodox. We're just not well known enough to have that yet. But we will. We'll have some debates soon, Lord willing. All right, everybody. Hope you're edified. I'm Luke. I'm with Nolan. We made the YouTube channel Ante-Nicene Christianity. Nolan started it, so he gets most of the credit for it. But we're good friends. We're trying to get the world to learn about the early church. This is the time to do it. There's a movement. You're part of the movement now. Whether you're in the Catholic or Orthodox Church, you're joining them recently. You're part of this movement now. Are you going to actually study before you commit yourself to one of these groups, one of these government-run groups like the Orthodox? There are alternatives. There are people who will show you what the early church taught. Farewell, everybody. God be with you, and we'll have another one soon.